At my retirement gala, my daughter-in-law stepped forward while my wife was helping a waitress pick up broken glasses. Then she deliberately poured champagne down my wife's silk dress and sneered, "People like you should learn their place." My son didn't help his mother. He wrapped an arm around his wife and whispered, "Let's go before this gets worse." I looked at my wife kneeling on the wet marble floor, then walked to the microphone. My greatest failure was raising a coward who protects cruelty. 3 hours later, my son received the first phone call that made his hands shake. 68 years old, on the terrace of Bellagrove Country Club. That was where I stood, when I told myself this evening might be the final one, where my family still held together. Magnolia and fresh-cut grass drifted on the night air, threading through clouds of perfume and the fizz of opened champagne. Behind me, 160 guests packed the ballroom dress uniforms, turning the floor into a tide of military blue medals, catching and throwing back the chandelier light. 34 years with the Air Force closing out here on a Virginia terrace. Every face in that room carried a story, a mission run together, a bond forged, an obligation settled or still outstanding. Miriam moved among the guests the way a vessel moves through still water, unhurried, certain of her course. She was 63 that night, dressed in an ivory chiffon gown that gave her a quiet radiance nothing in that room could match. Silver hair pinned up in the polished style she'd refined over a lifetime of military banquets and school evenings effortless earned. Welcome back to His Hidden Revenge. I'm glad you're here for this one. Before we get into it, drop a single word in the comments that captures where your head is right now. One word that's all I need. This story has a way of landing differently depending on where you are in life, and I genuinely love to know. A quick note, some elements of this story have been fictionalized for narrative purposes, and any resemblance to specific real individuals is purely coincidental. But the truth at the heart of it is as real as it gets. Before the children came along, Miriam had spent years teaching high school literature, and she never lost the ability to make a person feel genuinely noticed. "Come stand with me," I told my son Brent, pulling him away from the bar. "These men should know who you are." Brent was 36, wearing his dress uniform the way certain men wear funeral suits, like a thing to be endured and shed. 6 years in logistics, honorable discharge, nothing to be ashamed of. But at his side stood his bride of 3 months, and that was where my attention kept catching. Laurel Foxworth was 32, dressed in designer couture that likely cost more than most of my officers earned in a month. Hers was the kind of beauty that left a room, no choice, sharp cheekbones, ice blue eyes, blonde hair held in ruthless precision. What unsettled me, though, wasn't the looks. It was the hunger behind them. The way she swept her gaze across the country club, like a prospector, sizing up a claim she intended to make her own. I had put this entire event together for Brent's sake, not mine. I had no use for the ceremony, but I had called in favors, assembled the guest list, with care made sure the right colonels and generals were present. I wanted to hand my son a door into the leadership circle before those men moved on. A final gift, my network, my credibility ready to pass to him, if he would only reach out and take it. "Colonel Pembroke." Brigadier General Dwight Carrington approached with his hand extended, 67 years old, still ramrod straight in his dress blues. "To Colonel Gerald Pembroke, a man who never left a wingman behind." The toast moved across the terrace in a wave of raised glasses. I caught Miriam's eye through the crowd. She smiled quiet and proud. "Look at them all," she had murmured earlier, squeezing my hand. "You earned every face in this room." My daughter Adele watched from her spot near the French doors, sharp in a slate-gray suit. At 34, she had built a practice in estate law, using the same exacting discipline I had applied to mission planning. Trust documents, morality, clauses, asset protection. She always thought 3 moves ahead. The tribute video started at 8 o'clock. Brigadier General Rupert Ostergaard, a Pentagon figure I had worked alongside on procurement oversight, delivered the narration with his trademark authority. Footage from my years of service rolled across the screen jets on carriers' war rooms, commendations, younger versions of myself in desert camouflage. When the lights came back up, Ostergaard turned toward my family. "Ms. Pembroke," he said, addressing Adele, "your father tells me you're practicing estate law now. Trust documents and morality clauses, just like the colonel always thinking 3 moves ahead." Adele accepted it graciously. "He taught me to read the fine print, sir. Your daughter is the one who truly takes after you, Colonel." Ostergaard raised his glass. Same strategic mind, same integrity. The compliment landed in the room like a grenade with the pin already out. I should have caught it then, the way Laurel's fingers tightened around her champagne flute, as though it were a grip she was testing. Her smile went brittle and glassy. Beside her, Brent's jaw set in that look I'd known since his boyhood, the expression of a man watching someone else receive what he believed should be his, while he stood unseen. I had watched that look surface at school awards nights, at family dinners, at Adele's law practice opening. "Of course," Laurel murmured to Brent, her voice pitched just far enough to travel. "Always her." The crowd drifted toward the dining room. I watched Laurel make her way across the ballroom toward her mother, Renata Foxworth, who sat near the champagne fountain, weighted down with ostentatious jewelry. At 58, Renata carried the intensity of a stage mother who had spent decades choreographing outcomes. She leaned forward to receive whatever her daughter had come to deliver. Laurel bent close and whispered. Renata's eyes moved to Miriam, then back. A single nod. The air conditioning kicked on and raised the hair on my arms beneath the dress uniform. The band started up something soft, a waltz Miriam loved. She was over by the dessert table now, laughing with my former wingman's wife, with no idea that 20 feet away, her daughter-in-law's face had settled into something cold and purposeful. Brent stood motionless beside Laurel, collapsing inward the way he always did once she took the wheel. "Let's just get through dinner," he said quietly, the voice of a man who had already surrendered before the argument began. "Please." Laurel didn't answer. She was watching Miriam with the fixed attention I had seen in enemy pilots who had acquired a target. 34 years putting men into danger, and I couldn't read the threat standing 12 feet from my wife. Near the champagne fountain, a young server stumbled. A tray of glasses went sliding. Miriam moved to help, instantly crouching down with the unthinking kindness she had never managed to unlearn. She steadied the server, offered a quiet word, gathered the fallen napkins. That was when Laurel moved. She crossed the floor with measured precision. Champagne glass raised her mother, watching from the side, with an expression that looked close to appetite. "Tonight, Mother," Laurel had whispered to Renata moments before, "I'm going to show them who's actually running things." Laurel's face arranged itself into something grotesquely pleasant. As she positioned herself directly over my wife, still crouched beside the flustered server, I watched my daughter-in-law raise her glass and take that final step with the deliberate calm of a bomber on final approach. The champagne struck Miriam's gown. Before I could close the distance, a deliberate arc of gold liquid spreading across ivory chiffon in front of 160 witnesses. Miriam went still crouched beside the young server she had been helping. The liquid cascaded down her front, pooling at her knees, turning the fabric the color of old bruises. For one awful moment, she looked up at Laurel with the face of someone who genuinely could not comprehend what had just been done to her. "Oh, Miriam," Laurel said, her voice pitched to Carrie. Still playing the helpful servant, how quaint. Some people never learn where they belong. The words hit like artillery. I watched my wife's face move through its sequence confusion into shock and then something worse, humiliation, raw and complete, breaking across her features as the silence spreading through the crowd reached her. Laurel stood above her champagne glass, still tilted, smiling. "Learn your place," she said. The words hung in the air like gunsmoke. I stood 20 feet away, locked in the paralysis that comes when the mind is still processing a tactical disaster as it unfolds. This was not an outburst. Laurel had been waiting for this exact configuration. Miriam bent low, exposed, helping someone she considered beneath her. Maximum humiliation, staged for audience impact. Miriam's hand trembled as she reached for the server's fallen napkin. "Laurel, why would you—" The words barely carried. Champagne dripped from her hair, its scent mixing with expensive perfume, and something else, something sharp and acid beneath it. The band stopped mid-note. Conversation died. 160 military officers watched my wife kneel in champagne-soaked silk, while my daughter-in-law stood over her like a flag planted on taken ground. I waited for Brent to move. My son was 15 feet from his mother, close enough to step between them, close enough to do the one thing that honor required. In 34 years of combat flight, I had learned to watch disaster unfold in slow motion. The way a frame separates from the next before the fire takes hold. Brent moved toward Laurel, 3 strides across the terrace, reaching his wife quickly. But his hands did not pull her back in reproach. They guided her away, sheltering her, positioning his body between her and the stares of the crowd as though she were the one who had been wronged. "Come on," he said to her low and urgent. "Let's get you away from here before this gets worse." She gave a small laugh soft enough for only those close by to catch. Brent's hand stayed on her elbow, steering her toward the French doors, putting space between his wife and what she had just done. My wife was still on the terrace floor. The crowd watched Brent escort Laurel inside, watched him choose. Dwight Carrington appeared at my shoulder, his voice carrying a quiet fury. "Colonel, did your son just—" "Yes," I said. The word came out flat, tactical. He did. The terrace held its breath. Ice clinked in untouched drinks. A heel scraped against stone, the sound obscenely sharp in the silence. Champagne and magnolia, and the particular scent of shock. Everyone waiting to see what would give first. Across the room, I watched Brent stop at the doorway. Shoulders rigid, head down, one hand still on Laurel's arm. He did not look back. Did not look at his mother, still kneeling. Did not look at me. I had seen wingmen break formation over hostile ground before. This was worse. Adele appeared at Miriam's side, moving first with the decisive calm she had learned from watching me manage a crisis. She knelt without hesitation, her suit jacket already off, and around her mother's shoulders. "Mom, come on," Adele said quietly. "Let's get you out of here." Miriam looked up at her daughter, and something in her face came apart. Not tears, Miriam wouldn't give them that, but a kind of crumbling at the edges, the way stone fractures before it gives way entirely. I crossed the terrace toward them, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd opened up. Officers I'd served alongside for decades watched me move toward my wife, their faces carrying varying degrees of shock and revulsion. Not toward Miriam, toward what they had just seen, toward the son who had made the wrong call when it counted. This was the moment every father dreads, seeing his child clearly for the first time and failing to recognize what he'd built. Brent finally turned. He stood in the doorway with Laurel beside him, and our eyes met across 30 feet of Virginia. Evening and 36 years of fatherhood. "It's, Dad," he started. No, I didn't need his words. I'd already seen his decision. 3 seconds of action had told me more than 3 decades of Sunday meals and strained conversations about his sense of being overlooked. I reached Miriam and helped Adele bring her to her feet. My wife's gown clung to her, champagne still running, and I felt her shaking beneath my hand. "We're leaving," I told her quietly. "Gerald, we're leaving," I said again, but not yet. I looked at my son the way I would look at a man who had abandoned his post at the moment it mattered most. Brent's face turned fully toward mine, and I watched fear enter his eyes as something shifted in my expression. He had no idea yet, but in the 60 seconds since that champagne struck my wife's dress, I had already begun the countdown on a set of consequences he couldn't conceive of. Laurel whispered something in his ear. He pulled her closer, still shielding her, even now, even with 160 witnesses standing in silent judgment of what she'd done. I held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then, I turned toward the stage where the microphone still stood from the earlier tribute and began walking. I walked toward the stage at the same measured pace I'd used approaching debrief rooms after failed missions. Steady, deliberate, no turning back. The crowd moved aside without a word. My footsteps on the terrace stone sounded sharper than they should have, each one carrying the weight of 34 years of military discipline, meeting the worst night of my marriage. The band's equipment still hummed through the speakers, waiting for direction. I tapped the microphone once. A brief squeal of feedback, then silence. 160 faces turned toward me. Officers I'd served with. Wives who'd shared coffee with Miriam at 100 different duty stations. Young lieutenants who'd spent the evening looking at me as though I stood for something worth becoming. I found Brent in the crowd. He was frozen in the French doorway, Laurel's hand still on his arm, his face pale beneath the terrace lights. The greatest failure of a father, I said, my voice carrying across the terrace with the precision I'd built through 3 decades of briefing rooms, is raising a man who stands by and watches his mother be humiliated. The silence that followed had weight dense and choking, the kind that settles when an entire room stops breathing at once. "Miriam and I are leaving," I continued. "I will not be associated with cruelty." I stepped off the stage and walked directly to my wife. Adele still had her suit jacket wrapped around Miriam's shoulders, but the champagne stains were darkening across the gown. I could see the way Miriam's hands trembled when she tried to smooth the ruined fabric. I extended my hand to her. "Come with me." She took it without hesitation. "Hey, Dad, wait." Brent's voice broke across the terrace. I didn't turn. didn't acknowledge him, didn't give him the confrontation he was already rehearsing in his head. I simply walked my wife through 160 witnesses through the country club's marble foyer, still carrying the scent of prime rib and old money out to the parking lot where my car sat waiting beneath the Virginia stars. I didn't speak during the drive. Neither did Miriam. She kept her eyes on the passing streetlights, her reflection ghostly in the window glass, champagne drying in her hair. The smell of it filled the car, sweet and acidic and wrong. The Jefferson Hotel rose ahead of us, all glass and understated light. I had reserved a suite there 3 weeks earlier for out-of-town guests who had canceled at the last minute. The reservation had sat untouched in my phone, a contingency I'd held onto without fully understanding why. Now, I understood. In the military, we called it operational detachment, the capacity to execute a mission even when everything inside you is screaming to abort. The desk clerk's eyes went briefly to Miriam's stained gown, but her professionalism held. She processed the check-in without comment, handed me the key cards, and said something about complimentary breakfast that didn't register. The elevator ride took 38 seconds. I counted every one. Miriam watched the floor numbers rise, her breathing shallow, and controlled the way it became when she was holding something back. The suite had floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city, tasteful furniture in shades of cream and gray, a king bed with linens that probably cost more than my first month's Air Force pay. I guided Miriam inside, locked the door behind us, and finally allowed myself to stop moving. She stood in the center of the room, still wrapped in Adele's jacket, and the silence broke. She pushed me. Miriam said, her voice small and hollow. "Gerald," she said, "to learn my place." "I know," I said, and Brent chose to stand with her. Her face fell apart. Not crying, Miriam rarely cried, but something worse. A structural collapse the way a building comes down when the foundation beneath it gives out. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. I looked at my wife. 38 years of marriage, 3 deployments, 2 children, 1,000 military functions where she had stood beside me with grace and dignity. Now standing in a hotel room in champagne-soaked silk because our son had made the wrong choice. I reached for my phone. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled through my contacts. I steadied them. Old habit from weapons systems training, from landing on carriers in bad weather, from every moment I'd needed my body to hold still when my emotions were pushing for control. First call, Elliot Harwood. He answered on the second ring, even at that hour, his voice carrying the measured composure that came from managing financial crises for generals and CEOs. At 55, Elliot had handled my wealth management for 12 years and had never once pushed back on my decisions. Until now. "Gerald," he said carefully after I'd laid out what I needed, "are you certain the morality clause triggers a cascade? All discretionary distributions freeze immediately. Brent's quarterly allowance, the trust fund, access the business partnership capital, everything stops." "I know what it triggers," I said. "Execute it." "Effective when?" Silence on the line. Then, "I'll need legal authorization. The trust attorney will have to." "I'm calling her next," I said. Second call, Nadine Prescott. She picked up on the first ring, her voice precise, even over speakerphone. At 52, Nadine had built her practice around estate law and trust structures, and she had drafted every iteration of my family trust since the original document in 1948. She listened to my account without interrupting. Her breathing was the only indication she was still there. "You want to know what $17 million in assets looks like when it stops moving? It looks like a phone call at 11:30 p.m. and 3 sentences of legal language. The moral conduct provision," Nadine said at last, her voice carrying the clinical clarity of a surgeon locating the precise incision point. "Breach of moral conduct clause. I can execute the freeze by morning. Have the documentation filed before the banks open Monday." She paused. I heard papers shifting in the background, the sound of someone pulling up digital files. "I have to ask Gerald, are you prepared to lose your son for 6 months, maybe longer?" The question sat in the sweet silence. I looked at Miriam's champagne-stained gown, at her tear-marked face, at her hands still trembling as she finally let herself sink onto the edge of the bed. Then, I looked at my phone, at the legal documents Nadine was already queuing for my digital signature. "Yes," I said. Morning light cut through the hotel suite curtains at 6:55 a.m., and I had already been awake for 3 hours reviewing the legal architecture of consequences. Nadine's email had arrived at 4:07, The documents sat queued in perfect sequence, each one building on the previous authorization like mission waypoints. I sat at the hotel desk, laptop open. The screen's glow and the dawn creeping across the city were the only light in the room. Miriam slept at last, her breathing deep, and even exhaustion had finally taken her somewhere around 2 a.m. She lay curled on her side, still in the hotel robe, because we had left everything at the house. Because we had walked out of our own retirement party carrying nothing but car keys and the champagne stains on her ruined gown. I had been awake since 3:42, not from sleeplessness, but from tactical planning. While she rested, I had wargamed the entire cascade, the legal triggers, the financial implications, the inevitable counterattack from Brent and Laurel. By the time dawn touched the windows, I had contingencies mapped for scenarios they hadn't yet thought to consider. My digital signature, the real one authenticated through 3 layers of verification, appeared at the bottom of the page with a single click. The timestamp locked May 21st, 1966, 6:44 a.m. 1 down. The next document loaded automatically exactly as Nadine had sequenced it. Suspension of loan guarantee authority. Another click, another signature, another timestamp, then revocation of corporate share voting, proxy freeze on business partnership. Capital draws suspension of quarterly allowance transfers. Each signature armed the next layer of the cascade, the legal equivalent of weapons systems coming online in sequence. My coffee had gone cold in its cup, the hotel's complimentary dark roast tasting like burnt plastic and necessity. I drank it anyway, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. "I'm going to protect you," I whispered toward Miriam's sleeping form. She didn't stir. The documents kept loading. At 7:10, my phone buzzed with a text from Adele. "Dad, a guest recorded it. All of it. Do you want the file?" My hand stopped over the keyboard. Video evidence. The kind that converts he said, she said into irrefutable fact. I replied immediately. "Send it. Secure transfer only. I need the original timestamp metadata intact." 3 dots appeared, vanished, appeared again. Already on it. "Dad, there's something else. I need to show you the trust documents in person." The secure download link came through 2 minutes later. I navigated the encryption layers, watched the file settle onto my desktop. 47 seconds. Format. Timestamp. May 20th, 1966, 9:01 p.m. I put in my headphones and pressed play. The footage was sharp, someone's iPhone Pro, judging by the stabilization and the low-light clarity. The angle took in the terrace from near the dessert table, catching Miriam crouched down, helping the server, Laurel, moving in from the side with champagne glass raised. I watched Laurel's mouth shape the words. The audio caught every syllable. Oh, Miriam still playing the helpful servant, how quaint. Some people never learn where they belong. The champagne arc caught the terrace lights, golden and deliberate. The splash. The crowd's collective intake of breath. Learn your place. Then Brent's movement toward Laurel, not Miriam, his hand on her elbow steering her away. His mother still kneeling on wet stone. Evidence collection is like reconnaissance photography. You need multiple angles, redundant copies, and metadata that establishes chain of custody. I watched the clip 3 times. Then I saved it to cloud backup to an encrypted local drive and forwarded a copy to Adele's legal server with instructions covering secure storage and chain of custody documentation. 47 seconds that would hold up in any court in Virginia. Miriam stirred behind me, her breathing shifting rhythm. I closed the laptop quietly and let her come to on her own terms. She had earned that much a few more minutes before the day reasserted itself. Adele arrived at the suite at 8 a.m., precisely carrying a canvas litigation bag I recognized from her office. She moved with the kind of purpose that meant she'd found something that couldn't wait for business hours. "Mom," she said gently, taking in Miriam awake on the bed, hotel coffee in hand. Then to me, "We need to talk privately." Miriam waved us off. "I'm going to shower. Take your time." Adele waited until the bathroom door closed, then spread documents across the desk, with the precision of someone laying out exhibits at trial. Trust amendments, authorization forms, signature pages from various years. "Look at the amendment from March 1963. She said, directing me to a specific page. "Your signature authorizing Brent's loan guarantee authority." I leaned in and examined the signature under the desk lamp's direct light. My name in ink. The familiar loops and angles. But something was wrong. "That's not my signature," I said. The The capital G, I don't form it that way. The crossbar angle is off. Adele produced a magnifying glass from her bag. Look closer. The ink density, the pen pressure, it's inconsistent with your other signatures from that same month. She laid 3 more documents beside it. My actual signatures from March 1963, tax returns, the deed transfer for the cab and Miriam's birthday card that Adele had held onto, for reasons I didn't ask about. The difference was subtle, but beyond dispute. The forged signature had been competent enough to clear casual review, competent enough that Elliot hadn't questioned it when processing the amendment. But under scrutiny, the truth surfaced the way an image does in developing fluid. Brent had access to these files, Adele said quietly. He was helping you organize the trust documents that spring. You asked him to digitize everything, remember? I remembered, March 1963. I'd been reaching for something, trying to give him meaningful work, trying to build something between us. He'd spent 3 weeks with boxes of legal paperwork, scanning and filing, supposedly learning the family business. Learning how to forge, as it turned out. I had steeled myself to lose my son over one night of cowardice. I was not prepared to discover I had already lost him years earlier to calculated fraud. March 1963. I said, my voice flat. 3 months before he even met Laurel. Adele nodded. The betrayal isn't new, Dad. It's just newly visible. I looked at my daughter. At the documents fanned across the hotel desk. At the forged signature Brent had crafted while I trusted him with the legal foundation of our family. What else did he forge? I asked. Adele's expression gave me the answer before she spoke, and it was worse than I had imagined. She pulled another document from her bag. This one showed Brent's signature authorizing himself as co-trustee in 1961. My forged signature appeared beside his, granting him authorities I had never approved. 3 more like this, she said quietly. All the way back to 1961. Dad, this isn't new. This is a pattern. I stared at the papers across the hotel desk, coffee cooling in my hand, and worked to process 5 years of calculated fraud dressed up as family trust. My phone buzzed at 2 p.m. Sunday afternoon, a text from Laurel, a carefully worded non-apology that told me precisely who I was dealing with. I'm sorry if you felt hurt by last night's misunderstanding, it read. Family tensions run high at events. Let's move past this. I read it twice. Sorry if you felt. Misunderstanding. Move past this. Every phrase engineered to avoid admission, to deflect accountability, to recast a deliberate assault as a social miscalculation. The language was too clean, too considered. She'd had guidance, her mother perhaps, or an attorney. This was premeditated damage control. I showed the text to Miriam. She read it, set my phone down with the measured care of someone holding back rage. She thinks we'll just accept that, Miriam said. She thinks champagne and humiliation are a misunderstanding. 20 minutes later, Brent called. I let it ring 3 times before answering each ring, a small act of discipline. When I finally accepted, his voice came through tight with panic. Dad, what did you do? Laurel said you walked out in front of everyone, made some kind of speech. We need to talk about this. The pronoun of his loyalty was clear enough. There's nothing to discuss. I said, my voice carrying the same flat precision I'd used briefing personnel failures. Dad, please, Laurel's upset. She didn't mean, I do not subsidize cruelty. I said, cutting him off. That's all you need to understand right now. Silence on the line? Then, what does that mean? Dad, what did you do to the trust? The fear in his voice was immediate and sharp. He had already worked out that consequences were in motion. He just hadn't grasped the scale. Monday morning, I said. You'll understand Monday morning. I ended the call before he could answer. Sunday evening, May 22nd. Miriam and I returned to the Goochland estate for the first time since the party. I pulled into the circular driveway at dusk, the house lights burning warm against the Virginia evening, and everything appeared exactly the same. But it felt fundamentally altered the way familiar spaces do after trauma shifts the air inside them. Every room now weighted with what had happened. Miriam moved through the foyer, slowly, her fingers drifting along furniture she had arranged 30 years ago. The champagne-stained gown was gone, left at the hotel, but I could see her reliving it regardless. I keep seeing her face, she said quietly, touching the hall table where we kept family photographs. That smile just before she threw it. I wanted to tell her it would fade. That time would soften the image. But I had seen enough combat trauma to know that certain moments never truly leave. They simply learn to wait quietly until you are exposed. Monday morning, everything changes. I told her instead. I need you to trust me. She turned and her expression held something I hadn't seen in 38 years of marriage uncertainty about whether trust was still the right thing to extend. How many times can you pull someone back from their own worst choices before you understand that you aren't saving them? You're only postponing the reckoning they've made inevitable. Adele arrived at 7 p.m., canvas litigation bag in hand, her face carrying the weight of new findings. She skipped any greeting, moved straight into my study, and began laying documents across the desk. I found 3 more forged authorizations, she said, without preamble. This goes back 5 years, Dad. Maybe longer. My eyes moved across the papers, my name repeated on page after page of the documents I had never touched. Authorization forms, loan guarantees, asset transfers, fraud laid out in systematic layers reaching back half a decade. There's something I need both of you to see, I said. I walked them to the built-in bookcase behind the desk and pressed the hidden release. Adele had examined the forged trust amendments back at the hotel, but these were different older files, the ones that didn't record theft. They recorded every quiet rescue I'd run on Brent's behalf before the theft began. This is where it started, I said, drawing out the first folder. Brent had buried himself in credit card debt trying to keep up appearances with Laurel before they were even engaged. He fed me a story about a workplace bonus. I cleared the balance myself and told him I'd co-sign the accounts to help his credit profile. Miriam lifted the folder and read through it. Statements, payment, confirmations, the handwritten note I'd tucked inside the cover. Confidential, Brent must never know. 1962, $83,000. I moved to the next one. A restaurant investment badly conceived and gone inside 3 months. I told Brent the backers had written it off. In truth, I wrote the check myself. Adele's expression turned to stone as she read. 1964, $156,000. The largest folder. Brent had been weeks from personal bankruptcy. This was before he ever crossed paths with Laurel. His finances were in total freefall. I stepped in, restructured what I could, covered what I couldn't, and told him it was an early trust disbursement. I had buried those files to spare his pride. He had forged my name to take my power. Both of us had dealt in deception, but only one of us had committed fraud. Miriam had done the arithmetic before I finished speaking. Gerald, $427,000, and he has no idea. Not a single dollar of it, I said. I kept records because I needed evidence that I had tried, that I had gone back to him again and again even when he never knew it. Adele picked up the last folder dated 6 months ago, and her voice dropped to something cold and measured. He has no idea Dad was pulling him back from the edge. But he understood enough to put Dad's name on documents he never signed. The safe held nothing now except those manila folders. Year after year of covert interventions recorded with ledger precision, each entry noting the date and the cover story I had given Brent for the money. Come Monday morning, he would find out that every rope I'd thrown him over 5 years had just been cut. At 9 a.m., Monday morning, May 27th, I was seated in Elliot Harwood's office watching the screens go red as $17 million in family assets entered freeze protocol. Those manila folders represented 5 years of secret rescues totaling over $400,000. Brent never knew I had been the hand that steadied him each time. He was about to discover I could bring the whole structure down with the same precision. Elliot's office smelled like cedar paneling and expensive coffee. The atmosphere of old money and absolute discretion, the kind that accumulates when a man spends decades managing wealth for people who don't discuss it at dinner parties. 3 monitors on his mahogany desk rendered the trust's digital architecture from every angle, each displaying a different layer of the financial web I was preparing to dismantle. This panel tracks Brent's monthly disbursements, Elliot said. His voice had the careful evenness of someone who had been present for family implosions before. $9,200 from the trust deposited on the 15th of each month. He clicked once. The green marker next to Brent's name went dark red. Over here, his loan guarantee ceiling. $340,000 in credit underwritten by trust assets. Revoked. A second click. Another green gone red. All of it, I said. Every payment line that runs through trust backing, I want it broken before close of business today. Elliot worked the keyboard without hesitation, each entry dispatching automated alerts to banks, brokers, and corporate counterparties. The architecture I had built years earlier, when Brent was still finishing college and I was thinking about responsible legacy planning, had become an instrument of consequence, engineered with built-in defenses against second thoughts. That was by design. Once the freeze engaged unwinding, it demanded formal review, attorney sign-off, and no less than a 60-day window. Regret couldn't reverse it. A late-night phone call couldn't reverse it. Neither could a father's grief. Elliot paused before the final screen, his hand resting above it. Gerald, 12 years, I've managed your family's finances. I need to ask one last time. Are you sure? Certain, I said. He pressed the key. The cascade released. Within 60 minutes, notifications would fan out to Brent's bank, his brokerage, every institution that had extended him credit against trust backing. Hard freezes by close of business. By 5 p.m., the financial picture Brent had woken up to that morning would be unrecognizable. There's a second thing, Elliot said, his voice quieter now. He opened a screen I hadn't asked for, a shadow profile, assets and liabilities he had surfaced during the freeze preparation. Accounts I had never sanctioned. Credit lines that had never appeared in any statement I'd reviewed. Every one of them anchored to a single point, anticipated inheritance secured through the forged 1963 authorization. He used it, I said, not a question. Yes. Brent took out a personal credit line, $340,000, his name on it, but underwritten by trust assets via that forged signature, currently drawn to $287,000. The figure hit like incoming fire, nearly $300,000 in debt, every dollar of it resting on fraud. Financial warfare runs cleaner than anything in the field. No wreckage, no sound, just indicators shifting from green to red and ruin delivered by registered post. Elliot pulled up a breakdown of Brent's spending, set his Huntington Defense System salary against what he's actually spending each month, and the gap is roughly $4,800. The Midlothian townhouse mortgage, Laurel's car lease club, dues, everything sustaining their life right now, flows from this credit line, which rests on my forged name, I said, on collateral he never owned and obligations he was never capable of meeting. Correct, Elliot said. The moment we pull the guarantee, the bank triggers a margin call inside 24 hours. If $287,000 isn't produced immediately, they come for collateral. The townhouse first, it's his only hard asset. I settled back in the chair and took the full weight of what I was releasing into the world. Not guilt, I had moved past that threshold, but the particular gravity of demolishing something you built, using your own hands to do it. Walk me through the full sequence, I said. Elliot brought the flowchart up on the center screen, a chain of connected consequences rendered with the clean logic of a targeting diagram, the kind pinned to briefing room walls before a strike package launched. Freeze executes today, he said, marking the first node. The bank gets notification of revocation and issues a margin call within 24 hours tomorrow, Tuesday. Brent then has 72 hours to produce the funds or post alternate collateral. His finger moved down the chain. He'll have neither. Friday, the townhouse goes into foreclosure proceedings. Virginia law allows him 30 days before action, but the credit agencies are notified at once. His score collapses. He moved to the next tier. The collapse triggers mandatory review under Huntington's internal policy for cleared personnel. Financial instability is an automatic security concern. The following Monday, HR pulls him in best case counseling and monitoring. Worst case, his clearance is suspended while the situation is unresolved. 5 years of quietly keeping him solvent. 5 minutes to engineer the opposite. Nothing between those two facts had changed except what I now knew about him. Call it the catastrophic sequence. Elliot said something in his tone suggesting he felt a professional duty to name it plainly. Freeze drives the margin, call drives. The foreclosure drives the credit. Collapse credit. Collapse puts his job at risk. One after another, your son stands to lose everything inside 10 business days. I studied the diagram, the connecting lines between each stage of the unraveling, the timeline measuring out Brent's reckoning in neat intervals. He made his decisions, I said. Every signature he faked, every lie he constructed, every moment he kept still while Laurel humiliated his mother. Decisions. What's coming are the results. The bank contacts him by noon, Elliot said quietly. He'll understand immediately that this came from you. Yet that's exactly what I want, I said. I want him to know who pulled the floor out and the reason it came down. My phone buzzed at 10:17 a.m., Brent's name on the screen, 2 minutes behind Elliot's estimate, but The quality of the panic when I picked up was precisely what the timeline had projected. I was still sitting in Elliot's office, the chain reaction diagram filling the center monitor, when I accepted the call. Elliot rose from his chair and tilted his head toward the door. I shook mine. Let him stay. Let there be a witness to what it sounds like when consequence finds a man by telephone. Dad? Brent's voice arrived fractured and thin, the edges nearly gone. Dad, the bank called me. They're saying the loan guarantee was pulled. They want $287,000 in 48 hours, or they're coming for the house. What did you do? Traffic sounds behind him, the unmistakable acoustics of a man sitting in a parked car on a roadside, too undone to keep driving, unable to wait until he was somewhere contained before making the call. The panic had that kind of velocity. I activated the morality clause. I said, my voice holding the same level precision I had maintained since I walked through Elliot's door that morning. You should have read those trust documents before putting my signature on them without my knowledge. What followed wasn't ordinary silence. It moved through stages. Shock first, then understanding then. Something that looked like fear. He got that far, then the words quit on him. The denial couldn't survive its own first breath. Dad, please. Laurel has no idea any of this happened. If the house goes, you have to do something. Pick up the phone call, the bank tell them there's been an error. There was no error, I said. Or, Dad, I'm asking you to mortgage the car notes. Every recurring payment runs through that credit line. If this moves forward, it already has, I cut in. 9 o'clock this morning, the freeze went into effect. Before the end of today, every automated obligation tied to trust backing will bounce, including, I'd wager several you've been careful not to mention to me. His breath went thin and fast. What does that mean? It means the picture is complete, Brent. The $340,000 ceiling on that line. The $287,000 you've pulled from it. The $4,800 every month by which your spending outpaces your salary. I let it sit there a moment. Let the silence do its work. Even Laurel's engagement ring purchased on borrowed money underwritten by trust. Guarantees you secured through a forged signature. Want to know the sound a son makes when he grasps that his father won't be stepping in to catch him? 8 seconds of nothing. Then shallow breathing. Then the line went quiet. How did you even... Brent's voice gave out entirely. Dad, I can make this right. Tell me what you need. An apology. Laurel will apologize. We'll drive to the house, all three of us at the table. I'm not interested in apologies, I told him. What I needed was for you to put yourself between your wife and your mother the night it counted. You chose not to. That choice has consequences and the math doesn't negotiate. Dad, please. The pleading was stripped bare, no composure left, nothing held in reserve. I'm your son. The phrase was deployed the way it was meant to be, an appeal straight to blood and history, and 36 years of being his father. But the image I couldn't shake was Miriam on her knees in champagne-drenched fabric, while Brent steered Laurel clear of the scene. And the sound I kept returning to was the absence of any word from him in her defense. How much of this family's foundation did you actually put at risk? I asked. The question settled between us without an answer. Though I didn't need one, Elliot had already laid out the full accounting. The townhouse carrying a mortgage against anticipated inheritance. 5-figure credit balances propped up against trust expectations. Investments, vehicle leases, even dues at the country club. Every last obligation, stacked on assets he had no legal claim to, and credit obtained by fraud. Brent opened his mouth twice and got nowhere. I didn't think you would... I ended the call before he reached the end of it. Elliot hadn't moved from the chair across the desk. His face gave nothing away. Harder than you'd anticipated, he said quietly. Not a question. I left it unanswered. May 28th afternoon. Adele's summons to her Carytown office carried a tone that made the purpose clear before she said a word. Whatever she'd turned up couldn't keep. I pushed through midday traffic, left the car in the structure below her building, and rode up to the 3rd floor where her firm held a corner suite overlooking the Potomac. She was waiting at the entrance. No pleasantries, just, come in, my office, now. The room had a smell I associated with serious legal work coffee and toner, the signature of a practice grounded in dense documents and painstaking review. 3 browser windows sat open side by side on her laptop screen. Brent has a second email account, she said, skipping any preamble. Personal correspondence only. It was still connected to the family cloud backup. He updated his passwords but never severed the sync. She rotated the screen to face me. January 23rd, 1966, 4 months ahead of the party. Subject line, look Brent to Laurel. The body read, attached is the complete trust document. Dad's attorney wrote it tight, but there has to be something we can use. Look for sections about trustee replacement, especially grounds for removing him and Mom from control. Also, check the morality clause. It cuts both ways. If we can prove they're not acting in beneficiaries' best interests, we might have leverage. I went through it twice. Then I pulled up Laurel's reply. Found 3 potential angles, she'd written. The estate valuation clause is interesting. If property value exceeds certain thresholds, beneficiaries can request liquidation. Your parents' house is probably worth way more than the 1948 appraisal. We should get that evaluated. I had assumed the wound was one night sparkling wine on marble silence, a coward's choice. It was nothing so simple. It was 4 months of coordinated effort to gut everything I'd built and put my family home on the market. Adele moved to the next message. March 15, 1966, 5 weeks before the retirement party. Subject, preliminary evaluation complete. Attached Cornerstone Property Group appraisal document. Brent to Laurel Fletcher. Dowd came through. Estate appraised at $3.2 million. He says in the current market we could liquidate within 90 days if we had authority. Marked confidential. Obviously Dad can't know about this yet. My hands had begun to shake. I disciplined them still. Decades of training are good for something, but what burned beneath the surface wasn't cold at all. That's not the end of it. Adele said something fierce, running under her composure. Check who's CC'd on every email from February onward. I checked. Renata Foxworth. Laurel's mother had her name on every thread, every parse trust clause, every strategy session for removing us from the picture, every message to the broker, circling our home like a property listing. Adele held her cursor over the final attachment, the Cornerstone Property Group appraisal, March 15th. Goochland Estate, valued at $3.2 million, flag confidential drawn up for B. Pembroke prospective seller. My son had not simply put a forged name on papers and drawn funds he couldn't cover. While I was pulling together a party to mark his career, he was arranging the sale of the ground beneath our family's feet. Adele came back to me on May 30th, with a report from a source I hadn't anticipated, a server employed by the country club, who had been present when Renata Foxworth ran what amounted to a strategy briefing with Brent and Laurel at their Mannequin Sabot home 72 hours after the freeze landed. Renata's fingerprints on the email chain had already told a damning story, but a briefing was something else entirely. That was active coordination conducted in real time as Brent's finances buckled under him. The witness holds up, Adele said, her fury carefully leashed. She's been inside the Foxworth property for private functions before. She was there May 28th during a lunch clear when Renata assembled them both in the main room. I had no trouble constructing the scene. Renata's Mannequin Sabot showplace, all the hallmarks of nouveau riche excess chandeliers, scaled for a cathedral-gilt trim, applied with abandoned furnishings, priced far beyond their actual worth. What exactly did she say? I asked. Adele's delivery flattened into the register she used for verified testimony. Renata looked at Brent and said, "You are weak because you don't control capital. Wealthy families only respect the purse holder. If you can't seize control from your father, you're useless to my daughter." Those words didn't land like an outburst. They had structure and intent, the architecture of a plan I should have detected long before it was operational. This hadn't been Laurel's impulsive move or Brent's private grievance finding an outlet. This was Renata Foxworth running her daughter against my family like a targeted instrument. She wasn't finished, Adele said. The witness heard her mention the estate appraisal by name, said something to the effect of needing to accelerate the transition, push you and Mom out of the trustee seats fast enough that Brent could move the assets before you had the chance to rewrite the terms. Accelerating the transition. The vocabulary of a corporate raid, spoken across a living room table in Mannequin Sabot over afternoon coffee. Renata had been handling her daughter like a precision instrument, training her aim on everything my family held with the calm calculation of someone plotting a fire mission. "And Laurel?" I asked. Adele's voice dropped to something colder. She issued the terms. Either Brent wrestles control away from you, or he isn't the husband she thought she'd chosen. The witness said he looked physically ill, but he didn't refuse. He agreed to all of it. I sat with the image of my son, caught in that room, pressed from one side, by the woman engineering his downfall from the other, by the wife threatening to walk, and overhead a $250,000 obligation with no floor under it. Any impulse toward pity ran straight into the picture of Brent guiding Laurel out of the room, while Miriam went down in champagne-soaked fabric. "I need the footage from the country club," I said. "Not someone's phone recording, actual security files. If this ends up in a courtroom, we want documentation that can't be argued away." "Already in motion," Adele said. "June 2nd, I'm sitting down with their operations director." On the afternoon of June 2nd, Adele walked into Bella Grove Country Club and negotiated her way to the security office. She rang me first from the parking structure, and I could hear in her voice the particular calibration she applied before a difficult approach. "Clifford Dunmore, 15 years running security and operations here. Guards member privacy like a sworn duty. This one requires finesse. The car door shut, footsteps on pavement, then the ambient noise of the lobby, then the transfer to Dunmore's office. 90 minutes passed before she called again. "I have it." She said no, wind up, everything, but Dad, something came out of that meeting that I wasn't prepared for. The way those words came out of her mouth made my hands go cold. "Dunmore resisted at first," Adele went on. "Member privacy protocols, legal exposure, the standard institutional pushback." She laid out her attorney credentials and explained the matter, touched on assault documentation and potential criminal charges. That recalibrated his position. He granted her access to the security archive on a single condition. She had to sign chain of custody paperwork for every file she copied, standard cover for them. In the background, I could hear the sound of keys, then the particular low hum of digital files pulling from a server. The footage itself was sharp. High definition Dad, 3 separate camera angles. Laurel's deliberate approach across the terrace. The arc of the champagne glass. Miriam's shock. Brent steering Laurel away while Miriam was still on the floor. Nothing debatable about any of it. That much was expected, I said. But Adele wasn't finished. Her voice dropped a register. Dunmore told her the club had overhauled its audio setup the previous year. Overhead, directional microphones installed for event monitoring. Mostly window dressing, but the system was live and recording during the party. My pulse moved. They have audio. They captured everything, Dad. Dunmore played it back for her. The video shows Laurel in conversation with Renata 47 seconds before the assault. The audio overlay picked up every word. Adele paused. I could hear her drawing breath with the careful control she used when she was about to deliver something that would shift the entire weight of a case. Laurel said, "Watch this, Mother. I'm going to show her exactly where she belongs." 47 seconds. That was how long my daughter-in-law stood on that terrace with what she was about to do, already decided, while I stood across the lawn, still believing the evening could mean something. "The time stamp is locked." Adele continued her voice, carrying the measured precision of someone assembling an airtight record. Video and audio synchronized across multiple angles. Digital signature verification intact. This establishes premeditation. It proves Renata knew what was coming, proves it wasn't a flash of temper or a social misstep. It was a deliberate act carried out with the mother's full knowledge and blessing. "Did you pull everything I asked?" Encrypted drive, triple backup, chain of custody documents signed and filed. That footage would survive any courtroom in Virginia. I sat in my study, the manila folder from several days prior still spread across the desk. 5 years of quiet interventions, rescues my son never knew about, reduced to footnotes against the scale of what I was now looking at. My phone felt heavier than it should. "There's one more item," Adele said, her voice quieter now. Dunmore had played her the audio captured in the moments right after the assault, after Laurel had thrown the glass and Brent was already moving her back from the crowd. She paused. I held the line. Laurel had said something to Brent. The directional microphone caught it clean. Another pause, this one deliberate, giving me a moment to brace. She said, "Now watch your father choose between his pride and his precious son." The words hit simultaneously as revelation and as confirmation. Laurel hadn't acted on sudden impulse. She had engineered the entire confrontation. The public setting, the military witnesses present, the precisely calibrated humiliation to lock me into a choice she had already mapped out. She knew what I would do before I moved, because she had constructed the situation to guarantee exactly that response. And my son had stood there, heard her say it, and walked her to safety. Neville Bancroft reached me on June 10th to tell me he was placing my son on administrative leave, not because of the trust freeze, not because of the foreclosure bearing down on him, but on account of something Brent had been doing for 3 years that I had known nothing about. The country club audio had confirmed that Laurel engineered the confrontation with full knowledge of how I'd respond. Brent had heard her lay it out and chosen her anyway. But Neville's call uncovered a separate betrayal that had been running quietly for years alongside everything else. "Gerald, I need to speak with you about Brent," Neville said, his voice measured with deliberate care. "I've placed him on administrative leave effective immediately." Neville Bancroft ran Huntington Defense Systems operations, a man I'd worked alongside on bomber avionics contracts back in the 90s. When Brent joined the company 6 years ago, I had made the introduction. "What did he do?" I asked. 3 years ago, Brent told me the family trust would be committing $2 million to our Virginia expansion. Neville said he presented it as a done deal, already approved by me. On the strength of that commitment, on the strength of my name, Neville had fast-tracked him to senior program manager. $2 million in fabricated investment, with my reputation standing in as collateral. There had never been any trust authorization for a corporate commitment of that kind. "I know that now," I said. "The compliance review your freeze triggered flagged the discrepancy," Neville replied. "Brent has been trading on your name for 3 years, Gerald. 2 promotions secured credibility built from nothing, all of it resting on a capital promise that never existed. You want to understand what it costs to learn your son spent 3 years circulating your reputation like a personal line of credit. It feels like finding out someone has been drawing down an inheritance before you're gone, except he was spending your name. That's a worse currency to steal. I'm putting him on paid leave rather than letting him go," Neville continued, "out of respect for you, not for him. But this is a terminable offense. Using fictitious investment commitments to advance his position violated 6 separate ethics policies." "I understand," I said. "And Neville, I'm sorry my son's decisions caught you in the wreckage." "What happened to that boy, Gerald?" Neville asked, and his voice had gone quiet. "I don't know," I told him, "but I'm done trying to work it out." June 12th morning. I was at the counter in our Goochland kitchen making coffee when Miriam came in and took a seat at the table. The ivory chiffon gown had long since been handed over to evidence storage, but what it represented had not gone anywhere. The kitchen carried the smell of dark roast and vanilla candle. Morning light moved through the curtains, warm and unremarkable, entirely disconnected from the ruin of the past 3 weeks. "I don't want to see either of them again," Miriam said, her voice level, but without any room in it. "Not Laurel, and not Brent, not while he's with her. I can't face him knowing what he watched her do and who he chose to protect." I settled across from her, both hands around my mug. "I understand," I said, "and I agree with one qualification." She looked up. "What qualification?" "The door stays shut to Laurel," I said. "Permanently, but for Brent it can open. Not now, not until he demonstrates that he actually grasps what he did. But the possibility has to remain." Miriam's expression changed. "You're a better father than I am a mother. I don't know that I can look at him the same way again." "You don't have to," I said. "Not yet, maybe not for a long time, but the door stays conditionally open for the day he learns to take the right position, defending what's just not what's comfortable." She ran a finger slowly around the rim of her cup. The kitchen clock kept its time. "Conditional," she said at last. "The door stays conditionally open, but only for him and only if he comes through it alone, having left her behind." I had just persuaded my wife to leave a conditional door open for our son when the phone rang with word that his wife was moving to have us both declared legally incompetent and removed from our home. Nadine Prescott's name was on the screen. I answered on speaker. "Gerald, we have a crisis." She said no lead up. "Laurel and Renata filed medical power of attorney documents this morning. They're claiming you're mentally incompetent and that Miriam requires protective placement. They're making a move on everything." The kitchen shifted under me. Miriam's hands stopped moving. "What exactly did they file?" I asked. "Emergency medical POA," Nadine said. "The documents allege progressive dementia, erratic financial decision-making, paranoid behavior toward family members, unsafe living conditions. They're petitioning for immediate psychiatric evaluation and temporary guardianship pending a competency hearing." "On what grounds?" "The trust freeze," Nadine said. "They're framing your decision to cut Brent off as evidence of mental deterioration. They've attached a letter from a physician, Dr. Beverly Crane, geriatric psychiatry, stating she conducted a remote evaluation and has documented concerns. I have never had any contact with a Dr. Crane, I said. I know, which means this is medical fraud layered on top of everything else. But Gerald, they've filed alleging progressive dementia and unsafe conditions. If a judge executes this emergency order before we can respond, they can compel psychiatric evaluation for both of you and move to seize control of the estate within 72 hours. I looked at Miriam across the table. The woman Laurel had put on the floor 3 weeks ago, now being maneuvered toward forced institutionalization. How do we stop it? I asked. Emergency counterfiling, Nadine said. I need you both in my office today. We establish your competence on the record, expose the fraud for what it is, and file criminal complaints for attempted guardianship abuse. On June 15th, Nadine Prescott laid the fraudulent POA documents across her mahogany desk. Every page was flagged in red, marking the specific clauses designed to strip Miriam and me of every legal right we held. 3 days earlier, Nadine had outlined the 72-hour window. Now, we sat in her office, Adele, Nadine, and I, working through the legal instruments Laurel and Renata had attempted to turn against us. The room carried the smell of cedar and coffee morning light, cutting through the windows at hard angles. Nadine's desk was ordered with prosecutorial precision, each document placed for maximum legibility. Clause 3B. Nadine set her finger on a section highlighted in yellow. Gerald Pembroke declared mentally incompetent due to progressive cognitive decline and paranoid ideation following traumatic family event. They're citing your response to the assault as the proof of instability. I read the language, clinical, constructed to be devastating if a judge took it at face value. Clause 5A. Adele continued, lifting the next page. Miriam Pembroke requires protective placement in a supervised facility due to inability to maintain safe living conditions. They were trying to have my wife institutionalized. What I'm about to share next changed the entire shape of what I thought I understood about the people closest to me. Before you hear it, let me ask you this. If you suspected someone you loved had been quietly working against you, would you confront them immediately, or would you stay silent and build your case first? Miriam had stayed home for this meeting. There was no reason for her to sit in a room and hear the details of how Laurel had planned to have her put away. And here's the end game, Nadine said, sliding the final section across the desk. Clause 7, Brent Pembroke, appointed emergency conservator with immediate authority to liquidate assets for care costs. They could force a sale of the Goochland estate within 30 days of a judge's signature. The architecture of it was almost admirable in its viciousness. Estate seizure dressed up as elder protection, outright theft, wrapped in the language of compassionate care. There's something else, Adele said, studying the filing stamp. They submitted this specifically in Judge Mercer's jurisdiction. That's a 30-minute drive from where Brent lives. Why file there unless Brent has a personal connection to the judge, I finished. He worked on Mercer's re-election campaign in 1964. I wrote a donation check myself. Nadine's face hardened. They had forum shopped, filed in friendly territory, counting on Mercer to rubber stamp the conservatorship before we could mount a response. An elegant trap conservatorship, costumed as concern plunder, dressed as protective care. But they had made the critical error of committing it to paper rather than executing it in silence. We file immediate counter-motions, Nadine said, pulling up legal templates. Protective order fraud charges expose the whole structure publicly. I can have this ready by... Don't file anything yet, I said. Both women looked up. Send Brent a message, I continued. Tell him I'm open to revisiting the financial arrangements. Private meeting, no lawyers, no Miriam, just family. Adele read it instantly. You want them to think you're folding. I want them to tell me exactly what they're after, I said. On the record. Nadine leaned back. Gerald, that carries real risk. If you sign anything under duress, even inadvertently, I'm not going to sign anything, I said. I'm going to let Laurel lay out her plan in her own words, and I'm going to capture every syllable. Nadine's expression moved from concern to something considerably harder. You want a confession? I want evidence that cannot be contested, I said. Evidence that this POA is extortion, not elder care. Set the meeting for June 20th somewhere public but quiet. A cafe near the courthouse. Adele was already on her phone. I know a spot 3 blocks from Mercer's chambers. Neutral ground. June 20th, 2 p.m. I was in a corner booth at the cafe Adele had chosen, watching through the window as Brent and Laurel came in from the street. Brent looked worn down, his suit sitting looser on his frame than it had a month ago. Laurel moved with the self-possession of someone who believed the outcome was already settled, her hand resting on his arm, proprietary and controlling. The cafe smelled of espresso and pastries. Afternoon light came through the windows and warmed the table. I had positioned myself with my back to the wall, an old reflex from briefing rooms where you never left the door behind you. They settled into the booth across from me. Brent kept his eyes off mine. Laurel's smile was precisely tuned, sympathetic, hopeful, and completely manufactured. "Dad," Brent began, but Laurel's hand closed on his arm and stopped him. "Gerald," she said, her voice pitched to warmth. "Thank you for sitting down with us. We've all carried so much pain through this. It's time to start mending things." I let my posture ease deliberately. Let something like fatigue settle into my face. "I've been reconsidering," I said, keeping my voice measured. "Perhaps I allowed my anger to override my better judgment. The trust freeze has created genuine hardship. I'm willing to discuss new terms." Triumph surfaced in Laurel's eyes before she could contain it. "We always knew you'd come around. Family is what matters, not money, not pride, family." The audacity of that word in her mouth made something tighten in my jaw, but I held my expression steady. "What would it take," I asked, "to put all of this behind us?" Laurel drew paperwork from her bag and laid it across the table. I recognized the medical management clause Nadine had flagged in her analysis. "This is simply a standard medical proxy," Laurel said, her tone honeyed. "Basic estate planning. You sign the health management provision, Brent handles medical decisions if you're ever unable to, and we restore the trust. We move forward as a family." I studied the clause, the gateway provision, carefully worded to sound measured and reasonable while conveying sweeping authority. You want to know what a confession looks like when the person making it doesn't know that's what they're doing. It looks like confidence, like triumph. It looks like my daughter-in-law walking me step by step through exactly how one signature would make all the unpleasantness disappear. "If I sign the medical management clause," I said, choosing my words carefully, "this all goes away." "Completely," Laurel said. "We withdraw the POA petition, all of it. You sign, we restore your relationship with Brent, and everyone comes out whole." I looked at my son. His eyes were still down. His hands lay flat on the table, fingers trembling at the edges. Then I looked back at Laurel and offered her the smile I used to give enemy pilots who'd just committed to a decoy instead of my actual aircraft. "That's very generous," I said. She slid the paperwork closer, warmth radiating from every feature. "Sign here, Brent manages any health decisions if it ever comes to that, and we leave all this ugliness in the past." The recording device in my shirt pocket had been running since I took my seat, capturing every word, every admission, every threat, wrapped in the language of reconciliation. 5 days after Laurel's cafe confession, I sat in Nadine Prescott's office and watched her notarize the morality clause execution. Documents that would cut my son's trust access to bare subsistence, $2,400 a month. Enough to survive, never enough to scheme. The cafe recording had preserved everything with precision. Laurel explaining how the medical clause signature would dissolve the unpleasantness. Her voice clear and assured, confirming the POA was leverage, that withdrawing it was contingent on my compliance. Extortion framed as family reconciliation, held in perfect digital clarity. Now we were enacting the consequences. Nadine's office carried the smell of cedar and the specific atmosphere of high-stakes legal work coffee paper and the faint metallic bite of notary ink. Dense documents blanketed her mahogany desk, each page marked with color-coded flags on the critical provisions. Article 7. Section 4 is now operative, Nadine said, reviewing the final page before notarization. Brent Pembroke's discretionary trust access suspended indefinitely. Mandatory minimum stipend, $2,400 monthly, deposited on the first of each month for basic living expenses only. Adele sat beside me as co-trustee, her presence serving as both professional witness and family anchor. She had gone through every clause, verified, every trigger condition confirmed the structure would hold against any legal challenge. Restoration is milestone gated. Nadine continued turning pages. First, a verified written apology to Miriam Pembroke, reviewed and accepted by her personally. Second, Full repayment of all funds obtained through forged authorizations. Current outstanding balance $287,000. Third, completion of a comprehensive financial transparency audit. Fourth, a 12-month probationary period of demonstrably consistent ethical conduct. You want to understand what genuine accountability looks like when it's constructed properly. It looks like measurable benchmarks, verifiable outcomes, and a timeline long enough to confirm that any change in character is real rather than performed. Each milestone must be cleared in order, Adele added. No substitutions, no compression of the sequence. And Gerald holds sole discretion over whether the apology to Miriam rises to the standard of authentic contrition. I lifted the pen, the same fountain pen I had used to execute the original trust documents the day Brent was born, when I had built a structure meant to secure my children's futures. Now, I was using it to confine my son to financial survival. If $2,400 a month isn't enough for him, I said, signing with unhurried precision, he'll come to understand what the people he defrauded manage on every single day. Nadine's notary stamp came down with a heavy thunk. Official binding filed with the probate court within the hour. July 1st, 10 a.m. I stood in my Goochland Estate kitchen phone, pressed to my ear listening to Elliot Harwood request final authorization. I need verbal confirmation to revoke the personal guarantee backing Brent's townhouse bridge loan. Elliot said, his voice carrying the weight of a man preparing to detonate financial ordnance. Once I execute the bank, we'll call the full debt within hours. Through the kitchen window, I could see Miriam in the garden, working the roses in the morning sun. She moved with deliberate care, still carrying the invisible burden of what Laurel had done to her. The champagne assault was 6 weeks in the past, but certain violations don't follow predictable healing schedules. Execute it, I said. Confirmed, Elliot replied. I'll reach you when it's done. And 90 minutes later, my phone rang. It's done, Elliot said, no preamble. The bank's legal team served Brent formal notice at 11:45. Guarantee withdrawn, $287,000 outstanding, and now callable 30-day deadline to provide alternative collateral or face foreclosure. How did he respond? He called the bank in a fury, Elliot said. Demanded whoever authorized the change get on the line. They walked him back to the signed guarantee documents, your name, your authority to revoke. He disconnected mid-sentence. I thanked Elliot and ended the call. The sequence was running now. Morality clause compressing his income. House guarantee revoked. A 30-day clock ticking toward foreclosure. Every consequence I had built over the preceding 6 weeks was arriving at my son's door at once. The coffee in my cup had gone cold while I'd been on the phone. I drank it anyway. The bitterness felt fitting. 6 p.m., same day. Adele called, with something I hadn't anticipated. Dad, they're fighting, she said, skipping any greeting. Brent and Laurel, the neighbor in his building, called me. Apparently I'm still listed as emergency contact from when he first bought the place. She says the arguing is coming through the walls. I set down the book I'd been making a show of reading. What are they saying? The neighbor couldn't catch every word, but she heard Brent's voice rising. This happened because you couldn't keep quiet. You had to humiliate her in front of everyone. I told you to wait. Those words hit like a flare going up in the dark. I told you to wait. Not, I had no idea. Not, I tried to stop her. I told you to wait. What else? I asked. I had spent weeks telling myself my son was simply a coward, passive, conflict-averse, constitutionally unable to take a stand. Now, I was learning he'd been briefed on what Laurel intended and had counseled patience, not opposition. That didn't make him weak. It made him complicit. Laurel had fired back. Adele continued something about his failure being the problem, how he was supposed to bring me to heel, seize control of the trust, prove to her family that he was worth keeping. Then the neighbor heard something give way. Glass, maybe a plate. A long stretch of quiet. Then Brent again, the volume down, but the edge sharper. My father was right. You engineered every bit of this disaster. The coalition was breaking apart. The woman who had thrown that glass at my wife and the son who had watched her do it were now turning on each other as the walls came in. There's more, Adele said, and her voice carried a strange compound of satisfaction and grief. The neighbor said Brent brought up warnings, something about how he should have listened to your reservations about Laurel's family before the engagement ever happened. I cast back 18 months before Brent had proposed. I had encountered Renata Foxworth exactly once. Watched her work out my net, worth the way an assessor sizes up a property quick, practiced mercenary. I had told Brent privately that marrying into that family would extract a price he hadn't calculated. He had dismissed it as the reflexive suspicion of an older generation. Now, he was screaming the same conclusion through townhouse walls with a foreclosure notice on its way. "Is the neighbor credible?" I asked. "Completely," Adele said. "Retired federal court clerk. She knows precisely what constitutes reliable witness testimony. The alliance that had assaulted my wife, counterfeited my authorization, and schemed to have us both committed, was fracturing from the inside. The open question was whether Brent's fury at Laurel was genuine reckoning or nothing more than a man thrashing as the current took him under. Independence Day, July 4th. I sent one text to my fractured family and summoned them to the Goochland estate. Mandatory attendance 3 p.m. No exceptions. You will watch what you did. 3 days had passed since Brent's shouting match with Laurel had revealed he'd known her plan in advance. Whether his anger meant he was waking up or simply drowning, I had not yet resolved, but I was finished with ambiguity. It was time for the record to speak. 3 p.m. sharp. My private study, ordinarily a quiet room of books and military history, had been reconfigured into something between a courtroom and a confessional. A large monitor sat centered on the desk, connected to my laptop. Miriam occupied the corner chair, silent witness to her own violation. Adele stood at the door, arms folded. Nobody was leaving before this concluded. Brigadier General Dwight Carrington arrived first, still carrying himself with the erect bearing of a man who'd never quite left active service. At 67, he had flown combat sorties over hostile territory, cycled through 3 war zones, and never once bent the code of military conduct. I had asked him here deliberately, not only as a friend, but as a formal witness to what was about to be placed on the record. Brent and Laurel arrived separately. Their marriage was visibly in collapse. Brent's suit was increased, his face stripped down by stress and too many sleepless nights. Laurel had chosen armor disguised as designer clothes, her expression maintained with visible effort, her eyes carrying the look of someone who could hear consequences approaching. They didn't look at each other. They didn't stand together. The alliance had cracked, but neither had yet pulled fully free. I did not offer chairs. They could stand. For 6 weeks you've been using words like misunderstanding, accident, overreaction. My voice carried the register I'd used in briefing rooms when the room needed to come to order. You're going to see what actually occurred. Complete silence until it's finished. Brent tried to speak. Dad, we already know what... Sit down, watch, don't speak. I pressed play. The smartphone footage came first, the angle I had reviewed 100 times, but never once shown them. Miriam crouching to assist the server, champagne stains already marking the nearby linen from an earlier spill. Laurel's approach across the terrace measured, purposeful. The champagne arc catching the terrace lights golden and vicious. Miriam's shock. The crowd's collective intake of breath. Brent moving toward Laurel, not toward his mother. Then the security overlay, the wider, CCTV angle, 160 witnesses visible in frame. No accident was geometrically possible from this perspective. No misreading of the moment. Only a calculated act executed in front of Virginia's military community. Then the audio, the piece they didn't know existed. Laurel's voice 47 seconds before the assault, speaking to Renata. Watch this mother. I'm going to show her where she belongs. Premeditation preserved in perfect digital clarity. Then the post-assault clip Laurel to Brent while he was already steering her clear of the crowd. Now watch your father choose between his pride and his precious son. You want to understand what truth does to a room when nobody can deny it anymore. It occupies every corner. It settles into the walls. It plays as a 47-second audio clip, synchronized to high-definition video, in front of a brigadier general who had spent a career distinguishing between what was real and what people wanted him to believe. I watched their faces. Miriam sat without moving, tears crossing her cheeks in silence. Not grief now, but the particular release of a person whose account of events has been made permanently, undeniably real. Brent had gone colorless, his hands locked on the back of a chair. Not the expression of a man absorbing a surprise, the expression of a man watching every choice he'd made to look away become irrevocably documented. Laurel stared at the floor jaw set so hard the muscle showed beneath her cheek. The footage ended. Brigadier General Carrington's face had moved from composed professional witness to barely restrained contempt. Colonel, he said quietly, I have encountered enemy combatants with more honor than what I just saw in this recording. 30 seconds of silence settled over the room, the kind that descends when the last lie has been disassembled, and the truth is simply standing there. Laurel broke first, her voice carrying its defensive edge. "You don't understand family dynamics. That audio is stripped of all context. She was undermining me the entire evening, inserting herself into everything, making the party about her, instead of Brent behaving as though—" "Stop." Miriam's voice cut across the room, the way a command does when it means exactly what it says. She rose from the corner chair and walked to the center of the study. She looked directly at Laurel. "You told your mother you were going to show me my place," Miriam said, her voice clear and level. 47 seconds before you did it. There is no context that changes what those words mean. There is no misunderstanding. Laurel's composure began to give. "You have no idea what it's like being held against you at every turn. The perfect military wife, the devoted mother, always composed, always in command. I was helping a server who had dropped something," Miriam said quietly. "That was what you found threatening." Something broke loose in Laurel. Then the control she'd maintained by sheer will gave way all at once. "You were inserting yourself, making everything about you, acting like you still owned him, like Brent was yours to manage." Brigadier General Carrington stood, crossed the room, and walked out the door. 30 years of military fellowship with me, rendered as a single act of silent judgment. I had spent 6 weeks assembling evidence with the same discipline I had applied to every operation that mattered, because I had known this moment was coming. The moment when the pretense failed, when the explanations ran dry, when my son would be left with nowhere to look except directly at what his wife was. She deserved it anyway. The words tore out of Laurel like a confession extracted under pressure. Always so perfect, so untouchable, looking down at me, like I wasn't fit to be in the same room as her precious son. The room went quiet in the way rooms do after a detonation. Everything still, the air changed. Laurel had not confessed to an accident. Not to poor judgment, not to a moment that got away from her. She had confessed to deliberate malice, to the belief that Miriam had earned what was done to her, to the readiness to do it again. Brigadier General Carrington did not look back. 30 years of military brotherhood, walking out in silence, told me everything that needed to be said about where honor stood and where it was absent. Brent stood fixed between the monitor, still showing his mother's humiliation, and the woman who had just admitted she'd intended every second of it. The color had left him entirely past pale into something gray and hollow, the look of a man observing his own life come apart. The remaining question was whether he would find the will to choose, or whether he was already too far gone to choose anything at all. The morning after the tribunal, I came across Miriam and Brent alone in the living room. She sat rigid on the sofa, tissues collected around her. He stood at the window, unable to face her. The silence between them carried the full weight of 36 years of accumulated failing. Laurel had confessed the previous day that Miriam had deserved what was done to her. Brigadier General Carrington had left in open contempt. Brent had stood motionless between the evidence, and the woman who'd admitted it was deliberate. Now, consequences had run out of places to go. I stayed in the doorway and watched. Miriam's hands were still despite the tissues scattered around her. Brent's reflection in the window glass showed a man who had aged 10 years, in 6 weeks, gaunt, hollow-eyed, still wearing yesterday's creased shirt. Miriam spoke first. Her voice was steady, but something inside it had fractured. "I didn't need you to fight her," she said quietly. "I just needed you to stand beside what was right, to choose honor when it would have cost you something." Brent's shoulders drew in, but he didn't turn around. "I was trying to de-escalate," he said, the excuse falling flat the moment it left his mouth. "If I could get her out of there, calm things down." "You told her to wait." Miriam's voice was quiet but without softness. "The neighbor heard you screaming it. I told you to wait. You already knew what she intended. You just wanted her to hold off." Brent's composure gave way all at once. Something that had been held under pressure for decades came through. "I always felt like Dad chose everyone ahead of me," he said, his voice fracturing. "Adele got his mind, his respect, his confidence. You got his protection. He couldn't get to the end of it." Miriam crossed the distance between them, but didn't reach out. "You got his love, Brent. You were simply too consumed by resentment to recognize it. And now you've traded it away for a woman who told you out loud that she felt entitled to humiliate me." Brent's anger wasn't a response to the trust freeze. It ran much deeper than that, decades of believing he had been passed over, that I had rated Adele's intellect and Miriam's vulnerability above his very presence. "He never put me first," Brent said, barely audible. "Not for counsel, not for partnership, not for anything that counted." "Because you never reached out," Miriam said. "Every time he tried to build something with you, you met it with suspicion and burned it down. I left them there. There are conversations a father has no right to stand inside. How do you explain to your son that the love he failed to recognize was precisely why you kept your generosity hidden? Because you understood that his pride would splinter if he ever grasped how many times you had quietly pulled him back from the edge of his own disasters." July 7th afternoon. I brought Adele down to the basement vault, a climate-controlled, fireproof room, where I kept military records, legal documents, and irreplaceable family papers. The space smelled of concrete and aged paper. I entered the combination on the secondary safe Miriam had never seen opened. Inside, manila folders arranged in chronological order: 1961, 1962, 1963, 1964, 1965. Each one marked "Confidential Brent, Financial Rescue." I kept these because I needed a record, I told her. Not for Brent's sake, for mine. Evidence that I exhausted every alternative before I finally stopped. Adele opened the first folder. 1961, $47,000 in credit card debt. A wire transfer accompanied by an email to Brent, framing it as a consulting bonus. He had never questioned it. He never asked, I said, why a retired colonel would be collecting consulting bonuses worth $47,000. She moved through them with methodical care. 1962, $83,000 for a failed restaurant venture. 1964, $67,000. 1965, $74,000. Each one documented with transfer records and the cover story I had constructed to protect his ego. Total documented, Adele said, running the figures. $427,000 in undisclosed rescues. She opened the 1963 folder with particular care, the bankruptcy bailout, $156,000, an authorization form directing funds to Brent's creditors, my signature at the bottom. Adele paused. She pulled her magnifying lens from her bag and held it over the document under the overhead light. Her face changed not all at once, but in the measured way it did when evidence shifted the terrain beneath her. "Hey, Dad," she said quietly, "look at this signature, the capital L the way it forms." I leaned in. The signature was mine in broad appearance, close enough to move past a quick look, but under scrutiny, the truth surfaced. "That's not how I make that letter," I said, and felt something cold take hold in my chest. "You want to understand what it is to discover your son forged your name to obtain money you were already prepared to give him. It is $427,000 worth of documented sacrifice, meeting a single fraudulent authorization that retroactively poisoned all of it. He forged your signature to authorize his own bailout," Adele said, her voice gone tight. "Then when you transferred the funds anyway because you saw he was in trouble, and that's what you do, he said nothing. He let you go on believing you'd signed it yourself." I thought back to 1963. Brent had called in a state of crisis bankruptcy, closing in, creditors pressing. I told him I would look at the situation. 2 days later, I moved the money the way fathers do when the alternative is watching a child go under. I had assumed I'd executed the authorization during the churn of that week, and simply didn't recall the moment clearly. Brent had thanked me at length, talked about turning things around. He had been committing fraud against me while I was in the act of rescuing him. Adele worked back through the remaining folders, examining each authorization under the lens. 1961, legitimate. 1962, legitimate. 1963, forged. 1964, she stopped. "Dad, this one as well." A beat. And 1965. 3 years of fraudulent signatures embedded within legitimate rescues, camouflaged by the genuine ones surrounding them. Her finger rested on the 1963 document, the bankruptcy authorization for funds I'd sent, believing the request was honest. "He forged the paperwork," she said, "then accepted the money you wired when you thought you had already approved it. He's been running fraud against you for at least 3 years, possibly longer." I stood looking at those folders, the full documented record of hundreds of thousands in covert intervention, each file stamped with the date and the fiction I had constructed to let him keep his dignity. July 15th. I sat in a forensic document examiner's office watching digital overlays confirm what I had already understood in my gut. My son had been counterfeiting my signature for at least 5 years, possibly more, across documents I had never knowingly reviewed. Adele had found the forgeries in the vault, 1963, 1964, 1965. 3 years of fraudulent authorizations concealed among genuine ones. Now, we needed evidence that would stand up in a courtroom. The examiner's office smelled of printer toner and coffee air conditioning, holding steady against the heat outside. Dual monitors showed the comparison side by side. My authentic signatures on the left, the questioned 1963 document on the right. Digital overlay analysis. The examiner said, adjusting the display. She was a gray-haired specialist in her mid-50s who had given testimony in federal fraud proceedings for 2 decades. Watch the capital L and W formations. The overlays engaged flagging variances invisible to ordinary inspection. Ink density mapped in color gradients. Red, where the pressure was wrong. Blue, where stroke velocity diverged from my natural hand. The capital L's loop angle was off by 12 degrees. The W's center peak showed hesitation marks I had never produced. 1. Conclusion. The examiner said, passing Nadine a notarized report. The signature on this authorization transferring $156,000 is definitively not Gerald Pembroke's hand. Probability of error less than 0.1%. This constitutes prosecutable forgery. Nadine took the document and placed it in the canvas litigation bag that now held enough material to end my son's freedom. Video of the assault. Audio establishing premeditation. Forged financial instruments. Wire fraud. Unauthorized draws against trust assets. Gerald Stye. Nadine said, choosing her words with care, you are now in possession of criminal evidence, wire fraud, forgery of financial instruments, federal jurisdiction. The question before you is whether you shield him again or whether this goes to a federal prosecutor and he learns the lesson that way. I looked at the forensic report official, notarized admissible in any court in the country, a nuclear deterrent armed and ready. File it, I said. Sealed. He doesn't know we have it, but if he crosses one more line, this goes to the U.S. attorney. Adele understood without needing it explained. Not retribution, deterrence. August 1st. Word reached me through channels I'd maintained since stepping away from active service, the informal web that persists in every military community and every social circle, where people who've logged decades together continue to watch for one another. The call arrived at breakfast. A longtime friend, a retired Navy captain, his voice carrying the discomfort of a man delivering news he wished he didn't have. Gerald, I need to put you on notice. Renata and Laurel are circulating a story. They're saying Miriam fabricated the assault that you're using money as a weapon to control Brent. Elder abuse is what they're calling it. I set my coffee cup down with deliberate care. What exactly are they telling people? That you're paranoid and vindictive. That Miriam is emotionally unstable, that she manufactured the incident because she can't accept Brent having his own life. They're framing you both as controlling elders retaliating against a son who had the nerve to grow up. No written record anywhere, entirely whisper campaign. But Gerald, it's taking hold with some people. The Harrisons steered clear of Miriam at the gallery opening last night. Social warfare is aerial combat relocated to country club dining rooms. The same rules govern both. Never engage on the enemy's timetable. Choose your own moment. Keep the altitude advantage. How far has it spread? I asked. Charity functions, club events, dinner parties. They've cast Laurel as the patient daughter-in-law, coping with impossible in-laws. Every word carries plausible deniability. But the erosion is real. I thanked him and ended the call. Miriam had heard enough to understand the shape of it. They're dismantling our reputation. She said, her coffee sitting untouched. People we've known for 30 years are beginning to accept their version. Shouldn't we be pushing back? No, I said. August 3rd evening, I stood in the backyard garden, running pre-flight breathing patterns, the same controlled rhythm I had used before combat sorties, designed to bring the heart rate down and sharpen the mind to a point. Miriam watched from the porch. She recognized what it meant. I was in operational mode. The garden held the scent of cut grass and late summer blooms, the air warm and close. Cicadas worked in the trees where Brent used to climb as a child, where we had thrown his birthday parties, where Miriam had taught him to find constellations overhead. The decision arrived with the same clean clarity I had brought to planning tactical strikes. Zero public statements. Zero engagement with the gossip circuit. Zero defensive posturing of any kind. Let Laurel and Renata keep talking until they had talked themselves into overconfidence. Let them believe the whisper campaign was gaining ground. Let them conclude we were isolated and exposed. When I moved, it would be with institutional facts, forensic reports, video, audio recordings, legal filings deployed at the moment of maximum tactical advantage. I went inside, walked to my study, and took out the desk calendar. I marked a date in red pen. September 2nd, Labor Day, 30 days. Miriam followed me in. What happens on Labor Day? By that point, Laurel's finances will have hit their lowest, I said. The foreclosure deadline will be days out. Her marriage will be coming apart where everyone can see it, and that level of panic will push her into exactly the move I need. Which move? The one that puts everything on the record in a way she can't walk back or dispute. You want a clear picture of tactical patience? It's holding 4 weeks of forensic proof, video, audio, documented evidence completely still, while your enemies broadcast their lies, unopposed, until their own desperation walks them into the trap. Conceding the short game to take the long one, I told Miriam. Let them keep talking. Let them decide they've already won. Then I produce facts they cannot argue with proof that collapses their story under its own contradictions. She studied the calendar eyes resting on the red mark at September 2nd. You're certain she'll crack by then? Desperation makes people reckless, I said. That's not opinion, it's pattern. And reckless people confess. I checked my watch. August 3rd, 6:47 p.m. Then back to the red-marked calendar, 30 days. Within 30 days, Laurel's financial scaffolding would be rubble, her marriage visibly fracturing, and the resulting panic would deliver the confession I was building toward. The airspace clears by Labor Day, I said, watching the sun go down over the garden where Miriam used to throw Brent's birthday parties when he was a boy. Labor Day came in right on schedule, September 2nd, 1966, and Adele's network confirmed it. Brent and Laurel's marriage was unraveling in real time inside her mother's gaudy mannequin suburb mansion, 30 days as calculated. I'd drawn that red mark knowing Laurel's financial pressure would crest at precisely this moment, and I'd held position with the steady patience of a pilot, keeping his hands off the controls until the instruments signaled the window. Now they were signaling. Adele reached me at 3 p.m. voice, carrying the register I'd learned to read, measured urgency reserved for intelligence that required immediate action. Dad, there's a confrontation at Renata's house. My source says it's serious voices carrying to the street. The source was household staff embedded in the Foxworth home, long enough to distinguish genuine crisis from routine friction. Credible, observant. What are they saying? I asked. Laurel is putting everything on Brent. Adele laid it out. Total collapse, no trust income house. 18 days from foreclosure, eviction notice, administrative leave from Huntington Defense Systems, frozen out by the country club set. Laurel screaming that Brent was too weak to claim what was his, that Gerald had run his life from the start, and Brent had simply stood there and allowed it. I could picture it without effort, Renata's oversized living room drowning in gold fixtures, Laurel's maintained composure, finally giving way after months of strain, Brent absorbing the full reality of the woman he'd married. Then Adele's voice shifted, carrying something that might have been hope. He's saying things out loud he's never said before. Dad. My contact heard him tell Laurel, "You never loved me, did you? This was always about the money, the trust, the estate, the status. That's what you married." Those words landed like a reckoning, Brent, after months of paralysis and complicity, finally seeing his wife without the filter. Renata moved to stop it, Adele continued. Sided with Laurel, tried to cast you as the vindictive one. Brent cut her off. Told her she was the architect of this wreckage, not you, that she'd spent years teaching Laurel to treat people as assets to be liquidated. First time Brent had ever pushed back against that household directly. First time he'd named what they'd done, used him as a weapon aimed at his own family. Then he left. That was Adele's final line on it. He got in his car and drove off while Laurel was still screaming. I'd spent 30 days positioning for Laurel's desperation to break into confession. What broke open instead was my son finding words for the first time and turning them on the people who had made him an instrument against his own. September 10th evening. Adele had asked us to dinner, a deliberate reach towards something ordinary, a few hours clear of the strategic machinery that had consumed 4 months of our family's life. Her house smelled of roasted chicken and herbs, warm, grounded. Adele's dining room had the quality of a refuge of photographs on the walls, her daughter's drawings fixed to the refrigerator, the ease that only exists where affection isn't a transaction. We sat together at the table, Miriam, Adele, and I, navigating careful conversation around everything. We weren't discussing the assault, the document fraud, the collapse, searching for the feeling of what a family dinner used to be, before champagne and betrayal. Adele's daughter was 4 years old and sealed off entirely from the adult weight in the room, arranging toy horses across the living room rug, humming quietly to herself. She looked up open and unsuspecting. "Mommy," she said, "why did Auntie Laurel hurt Grandma at the party and never say sorry? You said she was mean." The table went silent. A 4-year-old's question, unfiltered, uncontaminated by any awareness of what she couldn't understand, hung between us like something with no safe way to handle it. She had no concept of legal strategy or evidence chains. She only knew someone had hurt her grandmother, and no apology had come. That was enough to undo Miriam. Everything held in check over 4 months: the assault, Brent's complicity, the POA attempt. The whisper campaign came through at once. Her hand went to her mouth. Her shoulders shook in silent sobs. I reached across and took her hand. Adele crouched beside her daughter, voice quiet and even. "Grown-ups sometimes make choices that hurt people, sweetheart, and sometimes they don't find the courage to apologize even when they should. But Grandma's sad," the child said, with the precision only the very young can produce. "Your grandma is the strongest person I know," I told her, keeping my voice level. "She's going to be all right." Miriam pressed my hand, steadying herself for the child's sake, pulling composure back in increments. Midway through dinner, Adele's phone lit up on the table. One look at the screen, and the warmth left her face, replaced immediately by something focused and hard. "Excuse me," she said, and took the phone to the kitchen. Through the doorway, I watched her read, jaw tightening line by line. She forwarded the message, typed a short reply, and came back carrying herself with the rigid control of someone containing real fury. "Dad," her voice was low, measured against her daughter's proximity. "Laurel has been in contact with the real estate broker Fletcher Dowd Cornerstone Property Group. He's the name from the January email thread, the same appraiser Brent approached about a private valuation of the estate. She reached out today requesting a fresh appraisal for the Goochland estate preliminary listing paperwork expedited timeline." Adele held her phone out and walked me through the forwarded chain. Laurel had told Fletcher Dowd she held family authorization to move the sale forward. Family authorization. Whether she was leveraging the fraudulent POA, presenting forged documents, or simply misrepresenting her standing to a broker, she was claiming authority over property she had no legal right to touch. You want to know what it feels like when your adversary steps into the exact trap you built for them. It feels like a 5-year-old asking why someone hurt her grandma. Innocence and calculated malice arriving at the same dinner table. "She's moving to sell the property before you can stop," her Adele said. "Before an injunction can be filed, before the POA fraud charges take form, she's betting that speed buys her the closing. Force the transaction access, the capital, present a done deal. This was the threshold I'd been watching for across 4 months. The panicked overextension that would set everything else in motion. Adele forwarded the full broker chain to Nadine Prescott with one line attached. She just handed us attempted grand theft of real property with a paper trail. I looked at Miriam across Adele's table. The woman Laurel had struck at a public event. The woman she'd tried to have, declared incompetent. The woman she was now trying to put on the street by selling the house we'd lived in for 38 years. The waiting was done. Before I turned out the light that night, I made one final call, a private investigator I'd retained twice before, in trust matters reliable and discreet. I gave him Laurel's name and directed him to begin full documentation the following morning. The timestamp on Adele's laptop read 9:47 a.m., September 18th. There on the screen sat Laurel in the lobby of Pinnacle Estate, realty body language projecting ownership and certainty, sliding documents across the intake desk as though the property were already hers. The waiting was done. What followed was surveillance documentation and the deliberate assembly of a legal record with no gaps left for lies to breathe in. Back in Nadine Prescott's conference room, Adele, Nadine, and I reviewing the investigators' footage from the day after Laurel had first contacted Fletcher Dowd. The image quality was sharp, every detail of her visit to the brokerage on record. She didn't walk in unprepared. Adele said, freezing the frame as Laurel set documents in front of the intake specialist. The organization of this paperwork points to premeditation, and the forgery quality indicates someone with professional experience. Nadine brought up the brokerage intake forms on her second screen. Listing price $8.7 million, commission structure, an irregular arrangement standard, broker percentage alongside a separate consultant fee directed to an LLC. Brent's Shell Company. Not a question. Adele confirmed it, a Delaware registration 3 months old. $15,000 in listing commissions flowing to him, whether or not any sale ever closed. That detail detonated like ordnance. This wasn't Laurel running a solo operation. Brent had taken money. That made him a legal co-conspirator by any reading of the statute. Deliberate involvement, financial gain. A conspiracy planned well in advance. Nadine advanced to the next set of documents. She wasn't finished. Laurel had submitted 2 separate forgeries. The power of attorney was the one we'd anticipated, but alongside it sat a notarized medical incapacity declaration dated September 10th. It alleged I was displaying signs of advanced dementia, that I posed a danger in my own home, that immediate intervention was warranted. Who put their name on it, I asked. Dr. Beverly Crane, Nadine said. The same signature that had appeared on the fraudulent POA attempt back in June. Adele had already established that Dr. Crane's medical license was suspended in Maryland, revoked specifically for this variety of misconduct. The woman manufactured false medical paperwork for a fee. I kept my attention on the surveillance footage. Laurel moved through that broker's office without a moment's hesitation. No internal conflict registering on her face, only the smooth confidence of someone who'd done this before, explaining calmly that her father-in-law needed protection, and that liquidating family assets was a medical necessity. Every word a fabrication, every word delivered without a seam, polished, rehearsed to the bone. The broker initiated a preliminary title check. Adele had noted a flag on the authority to list. Laurel had already booked a follow-up appointment for September 23rd, more documentation to provide more time to manufacture it. She intended to keep forging. Almost certainly, I said. Nadine didn't disagree. That brings us to a fork, she said. We move now fraud charges, immediate shutdown, or we hold back and let Laurel step across into wire fraud territory. I completed her thought. Nadine gave a single nod. Once that broker opens escrow, the instant wire instructions go out, or earnest money clears. This stops being attempted theft and becomes federal wire fraud. Heavier charges, longer exposure, and no room to negotiate a plea. Nadine shut the laptop. Colonel, she said, before we go forward, are you firm on giving him a chance to confess? The file we have is enough to go straight to prosecution. We could bypass him entirely. I studied the still image of Laurel frozen on the screen, then shifted my gaze to the empty chair that Brent would occupy in 7 days. One opportunity, I said. That's all he gets. One. Then we pull the crimson file, Nadine said. From her cabinet, she produced a heavy burgundy folder, the color deliberate deep, burgundy unmissable housing, the complete evidence package alongside criminal referral documentation. I watched her work through the exhibit tabs, surveillance photographs, forged instruments, a mapped financial trail, recorded transcripts, video, forensic signature analysis. 163 pages. 4 months of conspiracy rendered in documentary form. When's the handoff? Adele asked. September 25th, I said. 3 days ahead of Laurel's broker appointment, before she could fabricate another page, while Brent still thought he'd maneuvered himself into the clear. September 25th, 2:15 p.m. Brent walked into Prescott Law offices, wearing the face of a man who'd been burning through hope for weeks and had nothing left to show for it. The weight had come off him. His jacket sagged at the shoulders. Shadows had settled beneath his eyes. Adele had extended the invitation in neutral language, estate planning, a family matter, an informal pass through the trust provisions. He'd said yes without hesitation, most likely reading it as a sign that we were ready to soften to find middle ground. He took the chair across from me in the private conference room. Adele positioned herself at the door. Nadine settled at the head of the table legal pad in front of her. I pushed the burgundy folder across the mahogany surface between us. It landed with a definitive thunk. "Open it," I said. The folder shook slightly in Brent's grip as he turned back the cover. First exhibit Laurel at Pinnacle Estate Realty, photographed from outside. Second, the forged power of attorney forensic notations, identifying every fraudulent element. Third, the medical incapacity declaration. Dr. Crane's falsified credentials highlighted in a red circle. With each page, his color receded. I watched his chest tighten, his breath come faster, his hands grow less steady as the exhibits mounted. "You have one choice, Brent," I said, and the command register in my voice closed off every avenue of debate. "Confess in full, put your name to a statement acknowledging your role in this, or Adele delivers this package to the district attorney tomorrow at 9 a.m. Dad, I didn't." His voice gave out beneath him. "I didn't know she was filing false medical papers. She framed it as leveraging community property. She told me there was nothing illegal about it. Exhibit 31. Nadine's voice cut across his, and she turned to a page flagged with yellow highlighter. "Bank records? Your LLC took in $15,000 from Laurel on September 12th. Consultant fee estate liquidation services. Under federal wire fraud statutes, that receipt makes you a co-conspirator." Brent went still over those records. The evidence didn't require interpretation. His name on the LLC filings, the wire transfer record, the whole architecture of the crime mapped in precise detail. Everything he'd built his denials on gave way at once. The composure he'd walked in, with the carefully maintained distance from responsibility, it dissolved. "I was an afterthought, Dad," he said, his voice breaking through the effort to hold it together. "Never the one you called first. Roger got the business. Adele got the legal work. What slot was left for me?" The fracture in his voice deepened on that last sentence, and something shifted. For a single disorienting moment. I was back in 1940, standing at the far end of a gymnasium, Brent 8 years old, and waving at me from beside his science fair display, waving hard, while I held up one finger and finished the call with Roger about quarterly numbers. By the time I got across the room, his arm had dropped. He never raised it like that again. "So you went ahead with fraud," I said quietly. "You threw your weight behind your wife's scheme to take your mother's home because you didn't feel seen." "I felt like I didn't exist," Brent said. His palms pressed flat against the burgundy folder, and he raised his eyes to mine, raw, every defense finally gone. What came next wasn't a legal statement. It was years of accumulated grief releasing without structure or strategy. And somewhere behind my ribs, something gave way that had no connection to evidence or tactics. The estate gate sealed behind Laurel's Mercedes at 9:43 a.m. on September 26th. I stood at the study window and watched her go, no backward glance, no hesitation, departing for the last time from a property she had schemed for and never owned. Fletcher had excluded her from that morning's family session on my standing order. The burgundy folder rested on my desk, still closed. Brent sat facing me, hollowed out. Adele stood at the fireplace, arms folded tight. The room had the weight of a proceeding. "I have to say something," Brent said barely above a murmur. He was still shaking as he began to explain his silence. I let him go. "I knew what she was doing," he said. "Not the document fraud I had no knowledge of, that until you laid it out in front of me, but the rest of it. The distortions, the narrative she constructed about you, the way she presented herself as the victim while your accounts bled. I saw all of that." Adele's face went cold. "You saw it. I saw it," Brent said again, and stayed quiet. "Not because I was weak, Dad. Not because she had leverage over me." He held my gaze. The thing I found there wasn't contrition. It was anger. Something old packed in tight. Because some part of me was glad to watch you struggle. That landed like a second detonation. For 2 months, I'd been running the model Brent as a compromised man, outplayed by someone more ruthless. That model was wrong. "You never failed at anything," he said, his voice splitting at the edges. The uniform, the commendations, the respect, everyone measuring themselves against Colonel Gerald Pembroke. And I was the one who fell short. The son who left for law school instead of service, who picked the wrong partner, who couldn't clear the bar you'd set without knowing you'd set it. He produced a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. So, when Laurel started working her angle, when I could see you finally losing ground, finally exposed, I stood aside. Told myself it was about avoiding conflict. The truth was simpler and uglier. I wanted you to understand what it meant to lose. Adele moved in his direction, but my hand came up. "Not yet. That's why you came in today," I said. "That's why you're sitting here." "Because I was wrong," Brent said. Because forging your name, erasing your identity, tearing apart what you spent a life building, that stopped being a reckoning somewhere along the way. It became something else entirely. It became cruelty. And I handed her the tools. His face came apart. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so goddamn sorry." No one spoke. Adele watched me, waiting to see what came next. I had nothing to give her. This changed the entire map. Brent was not a passive instrument. He had chosen eyes open, and then conscience had arrived late and insufficient. "Leave," I said at last. "Both of you, I need the room." They went. I remained with the burgundy folder and what was left of my family. October 5th arriving with surgical precision. Fletcher reached me at 6:47 p.m. "You need to hear this," he said, and then played me a voicemail Laurel had left for Brent. The voice on the recording was controlled, impersonal, businesslike. "I've accepted a position with Caldecott and Associates in Charlotte. I'll be in North Carolina by the 15th. The Midlothian townhouse is yours. I've taken my name off the deed. We functioned as partners, Brent. But a partnership depends on assets worth holding. Your path into the upper tier no longer exists, and I don't commit resources to a position with no upside. Don't contact me." "Click," she walked, Fletcher said. The moment his utility ran out, she was already gone. Satisfaction was what I should have felt. What I actually felt was something closer to pity. Brent had traded his integrity for a woman who categorized him as an entry on a balance sheet. 3 days later came the interruption. Adele found Brent unconscious in his townhouse, empty bottles and financial statements spread around him. She called me at 2:14 a.m. "He's not suicidal," she said, "but he's shattered. What do we do?" "Not yet," I told her. "Let the consequences do their work." October 20th. Dr. Ingrid Kuhlman sat across from me in the oncology clinic, steel gray hair drawn back in a precise bun, reading glasses settled on her nose. My test results open in front of her. Mid-50s, exacting, the kind of medical officer I'd have wanted under my command. "Stage 1, she said, "highly treatable. The biopsy confirms the cancer is localized to the prostate, and we've caught it before it moved. Your outlook is excellent. With standard treatment protocols, we're looking at a 98% 5-year survival rate. I absorbed the intelligence, not a death sentence, a threat that could be managed." Dr. Kuhlman continued. "However, treatment would be demanding. Radiation, possibly surgery. Depending on how my body responded, I would need support. Family," she said, "ideally family." The words settled into the sterile air and stayed there. I drove back slowly, running timelines and objectives through my mind. The cancer diagnosis was the exit twist I hadn't seen coming, a countdown clock that altered the entire strategic picture. This was no longer about revenge. It was about what I left behind. At 6:30 p.m., I called Brent. He picked up on the 4th ring. "It's me," I said. "I have cancer. Stage 1 good prognosis, but I'll need assistance during treatment." Silence on the line. "Here's your opening," I continued. "You said you wanted to make amends. This is how. Your shift begins tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. You drive me to appointments, you manage the medications, you handle the logistics. No excuses, no renegotiating. You show up, do the work, and earn your way back into this family. Or you don't, and we're finished. Your call." A longer silence. "Then I'll be there." "We'll see," I said, and ended the call. Adele came over an hour later. I told her about the diagnosis, the treatment plan, the terms I'd laid out for her brother. "You think he'll actually show?" she asked, doubt plain on her face. 7 a.m., I said. "We'll have our answer by 7:01. The radiation schedule was pinned to the refrigerator in Brent's block print handwriting. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6:15 a.m. departure. Miriam's pharmacy rotation, Mondays and Wednesdays. Meal prep circled in red. 5 days in, and not one 7 a.m. had passed without him. He'd walked through the door that first morning at 6:58 hollow-eyed, but there. I'd stood at the window watching the driveway. When his sedan cleared the gates 2 minutes ahead of time, something in my chest released fractionally. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. Now it was October 25th. 8 days into what Dr. Kuhlman had warned would be a punishing treatment protocol. Brent sat in the driver's seat, hands at 10 and 2, threading morning traffic toward the oncology center, with the concentrated quiet I'd once applied to reconnaissance work. The real reveal wasn't that he'd appeared the first day. It was that he kept appearing one unglamorous day after another. No fanfare, no complaint. "Coffee's in the thermos," he said, eyes on the road, nodding toward the cup holder. Low acid the way Dr. Kuhlman recommended. I took it. A small gesture. But precision in small things tends to reveal something true about a person. The radiation sessions were brief and punishing 20 minutes of treatment that left me spent for hours. Brent waited in the lobby, working through case files or scrolling his phone, and he was always on his feet when I came out. He'd learned to read my fatigue without being told, easing into slower turns, softer stops, keeping conversation to nothing when nothing was what I needed. On the Thursday ride home, he broke the quiet. "Am I still allowed to be your son?" he asked, gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Or is this just community service while you deliberate?" I watched Virginia roll past outside the window. The question merited an honest answer. "You're my son," I said. "That's not something that changes, it's biology. Whether you're family, that's something you build back one morning at a time." He gave a slow nod, jaw held firm. "Fair." At home, Miriam watched his efforts with guarded neutrality. She'd observe him folding laundry in the guest room, sorting prescription refills, prepping meals to the dietary plan Dr. Kuhlman had laid out. One evening, while he was loading the dishwasher, she caught my eye from across the kitchen. "He's trying," she said quietly. "I'll give him that much." The days built up like entries in a case file. Brent drove me to every appointment. He collected the prescriptions. He absorbed the invisible domestic weight that illness generates, the trash, the yard. The grocery runs that pile up when the body is occupied, fighting something else. He didn't seek acknowledgement for any of it. He simply handled it. I watched him measure my medication into the weekly pill organizer with the same methodical focus I'd once given mission briefings. And I registered something unexpected, not forgiveness, quite, but a kind of recognition. This was what repair actually looked like. Not dramatic declarations or sweeping apologies. Just steady, unglamorous presence in the small details that survival requires. November 2nd, cold and clear. Brent had been with us 8 unbroken days. That evening, after my medication and a light dinner, Miriam set her fork down with deliberate care. "Brent," she said, "I think we need to talk." He went completely still. I recognized the fear moving across his face, the terror that the fragile structure he'd been building was about to come down. "I need to say something first," he said quickly before she could go on. His hands weren't quite steady as he put down his fork. "I've been searching for the right words, and I don't think they exist, so I'll just say it straight." Miriam's expression held steady, unreadable. "I let her destroy you to wound him," Brent said, looking directly at his mother. "I turned your pain into a tool because I was too much of a coward to simply tell Dad I felt like a ghost in this family. I watched Laurel strip your dignity, drain your accounts, put her name on your signatures, and I held my tongue. Not because she had me under her thumb, because part of me wanted you both to hurt." His voice fractured. "I am so profoundly sorry, Mom." The silence expanded. Miriam's eyes grew bright, but her bearing didn't waver. "I forgive you, Brent," she said at last. The words landed with the force of something unexpected and decisive. "But I need you to hear something. I'm not asking you to take my side against your father. I'm asking you to choose honor over ego. Every single time." She reached across the table, her hand settling over Brent's not surrender, but a bridge with the weight limits made clear. "That's the standard I added watching my son. Can you hold to it?" "I don't know," Brent said with the honesty of someone done negotiating. "But I want to." Miriam's grip firmed slightly. The exit twist came in what she said next, turning absolution into something ongoing. "Forgiveness isn't clearance to stop working. It's where the work begins, not where it ends. Are we clear on that?" "Ah, yes," Brent whispered. We sat there, all three of us joined across scarred wood and 18 months of damage. The medication was pulling at me, but I held myself present. This was reconciliation, as it actually happens. Provisional, imperfect, held together by intention rather than certainty. Brent looked at his mother's hand over his, then looked at me. The question was in his eyes before he found the words. "What if I fail?" he asked quietly. "What if I make the wrong call again?" Miriam didn't withdraw. Her voice was soft, but carried no give in it. "Then you'll have shown who you are," she said. The fountain pen moved across heavy parchment, with the distinct scratch that belongs only to estate documents. And I watched Brent sign away 5 years of asset control without attempting a single amendment. November 15th, 1966, the day my son turned words into action. Nadine sat across from us in her Carytown office, the trust amendment arranged in numbered sections before her. Adele stood at the window, arms folded watching her brother with an expression I couldn't fully decode. Brent held the pen without a tremor. "Mr. Pembroke," Nadine said, using his name with formal precision. "You understand these restrictions hold regardless of any rehabilitation progress, correct? 5 years non-negotiable, no authority to manage or execute no investment decisions, no asset transfers beyond basic distributions, and all trust assets permanently protected against claims by current or future spouses." Brent met her gaze. "I understand. Where do I sign?" The reveal was in his tone, measured undefended, stripped of the instinct to negotiate that had defined his legal career. The man who had once combed every contract for leverage was accepting terms he'd once have fought clause by clause and accepting them without a word. This was not a performance. This was penance made into something concrete and lasting. He worked through each page without hurry. Initial here, sign there, date, and witness acknowledgement at the foot of the page. Nadine turned pages. I executed as trustee. Adele witnessed. The scratch of pens filled the quiet room. "He didn't even review the restrictions a second time," Adele murmured to me, low enough that Brent might not catch it. "That's different." It was different. The Brent who'd walked in here 18 months ago would have found the gaps pushed on the timeline's manufactured exceptions. This Brent simply signed. "There's a final provision," Nadine said, placing one more page on the table. "Annual review meetings with all parties present. You'll submit financial disclosures, employment verification, and character references. Miss a single meeting, and the clock returns to year 1. Brent didn't hesitate. Understood. He signed. Nadine gathered the documents, pressed her notary seal into place, and slid everything into a canvas litigation bag. "Effective immediately," she said, "copies go to the estate attorney and the probate court. Mr. Pembroke, you've accepted significant limitations on yourself. I hope you appreciate the weight of what you've committed to." "I do," Brent said quietly. "Thank you." We rode the elevator down without a word. Adele broke the silence first. "Why didn't you push back?" She looked at Brent. "Even on the annual reset clause alone." Brent glanced at her, then at me. "Because I earned every restriction on that document. And because some things matter more than controlling assets." The doors parted. We walked out into November cold. December 1st brought the final engagement with Laurel. Nadine had arranged a conference call between legal teams, one last opening for settlement before a potential criminal referral. I sat in Nadine's office with Adele beside me, both of us watching the speakerphone with clinical detachment. Laurel's voice came through sharp and assured her attorney Aldrich Featherstone, alongside her, a man whose weary cadence suggested he'd recently discovered his client had concealed material facts about forgery and fraud. "I'm entitled to compensation for the reputational harm this family has inflicted," Laurel said, no preamble. $250,000 resolves it quietly. Otherwise, I pursue civil litigation, defamation, emotional distress. Nadine's expression didn't shift by a degree. She opened a folder with measured calm. "Miss Crane," she said, using the surname Laurel had reverted to after walking away from Brent. "I'm entering into Record Exhibit A, your husband's recorded verbal confession, obtained October 25, 1966, acknowledging full knowledge of the forgery of estate documents, captured on authenticated audio, with verified timestamp, and Exhibit B, fraudulent power of attorney documents bearing your notarization. Shall I continue through Exhibits C through F, or would you prefer I route this entire package to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office right now?" Silence on the line. Aldrich Featherstone cleared his throat. "Miss Crane, I wasn't made aware." "You weren't aware because your client withheld material facts," Nadine said without a trace of heat. "I have documentation of wire transfers, forged signatures, and identity theft spanning 14 months. The evidence is thorough and fully admissible. So, let me be direct. There will be no settlement. There will be no compensation. Miss Crane will withdraw all claims immediately, or I file criminal referral before close of business today." The line held silence for 3 seconds. Then Aldrich spoke again, his voice pulled tight. "We withdraw all claims effective immediately. Miss Crane, I'll need to speak with you privately about—" "You can all go straight to hell." Laurel cut through him, her composure finally splitting at the seam. 2 weeks later, Nadine informed me that Renata Foxworth had quietly moved to Hilton Head. No criminal charges, her name had turned up on email, CC lines, and in coaching threads. Participating in a conspiracy isn't the same as executing it. But the Virginia social circuit keeps a long memory. Within a month, 3 charity board invitations had been quietly rescinded. Some consequences reached their target without ever entering a courtroom. The exit twist arrived in Laurel's parting words before the line went dead, laying bare the transactional worldview she'd never shed. Families like yours always rot from the inside. You think you've won. You're just locked in together with your dysfunction and your precious principles. I'll be watching from a distance. The line clicked dead. Nadine closed her laptop with a soft snap. The office settled into quiet. "She'll be watching a long time," Nadine said, consolidating her files with the same methodical precision she'd brought to every phase of this campaign. "The criminal statute of limitations is 5 years. I'll keep this file open in case she decides distance isn't sufficient." Adele let out a slow breath. "Is it over? Legally?" Nadine gave a single nod. "Yes. The trust is sealed. The assets are secured. Miss Crane holds no claim to anything. She's out." "And in practical terms?" I asked. Nadine met my eyes with the same clear-eyed assessment she'd carried into every engagement of this fight. "Practically, Colonel, that depends on whether your family can heal faster than its scars. The legal work is finished. What comes next is yours to determine." The pine tree stood lit in the corner of our living room, low instrumental music drifting from Miriam's old speakers. And I understood that this was the first gathering in 8 months where no one was performing a role. December 15th, 1966. Imperfect, but honest. Nadine had asked whether we could heal faster than we scarred. The answer was seated around our dining table that evening, tentative but real. Brent carved the roast with close attention, serving Miriam first without being asked. Adele set out dishes, her movements carrying less guardedness than they had in months. Conversation stayed in shallow water. Brent's caseload at work, Adele's plans for New Year's. Nobody brought up Laurel. Nobody touched the trust restrictions or the months of legal warfare. We occupied the present tense with care. "You remembered Mom takes her coffee light," Adele said to Brent as he poured after dinner, her voice cautiously warm. "That's real attention." "I'm trying to notice what I used to look past," Brent said quietly. Miriam accepted the cup with a small nod. Not the forgiveness that had already been offered, but something nearer to acknowledgement that effort was being made, and that she was registering it. I watched from my chair, treatment fatigue making me content to observe, rather than steer. The radiation had wrapped up 2 weeks earlier. Dr. Kuhlman had been encouraged by my progress. An envelope from her office sat unopened on my desk upstairs, scan results that had arrived that afternoon, which I hadn't yet shared. After Brent and Adele left, I climbed the stairs and opened the envelope in my study. The language was technical, but the meaning was clear. Clean margins, no residual cancer detected, excellent response to treatment. 5-year survival prognosis upgraded to 99%. I sat with that for several minutes, then drew out the trust amendment Nadine had filed. The entry twist arrived in the decision before me. I could move to amend the 5-year probation clause, reduce it as recognition of Brent's consistent effort. But mercy and accountability weren't opposing forces. They could occupy the same ground. The probation would stand. Clean margins didn't mean trust operated on medical timelines. Healing moved in inches, not in announcements. I filed the results and went downstairs. Miriam looked up from her book. "Good news?" she asked, reading my face. "Clear," I said. "Dr. Kuhlman is very pleased." She set the book down and came across the room, putting her arms around me with the particular intensity of someone who'd nearly lost what she'd spent years protecting. We stood in the quiet living room, the pine tree casting its soft light around us. 2 people who had come through something that should have broken them. December 20th, cold and bright. Brent came by for his weekly check-in, part of the informal accountability structure we'd built alongside the legal one. We took our coffee out to the frost-covered back porch, breath rising in the morning air. "When will you know I've earned it back?" Brent asked, looking across the winter yard. "Full trust, I mean." I gave the question its due. The frost on the porch railing looked like sugarwork, precise, fragile, entirely dependent on the temperature holding. "Trust doesn't come back because an apology was well-worded, son." I said at last. "It returns in inches. You show up without fail. You choose honor when it costs you something. You demonstrate over months and years that the man who enabled that betrayal no longer exists. And one day, I'll notice I've stopped checking. That's your answer. Brent took that in without pushing back. How often will you check annual reviews for the first 3 years? I said. Annual after that. Financial disclosures, character references, employment, verification, the amendment lays it all out. And if you clear every review, you'll have proved exactly what you're working to prove, that you can sustain honor under ordinary conditions, not just when the stakes are obvious. Brent nodded slowly, holding his coffee in both hands against the cold. I will make myself worthy of the name, he said quietly, however long that takes. I studied my son, thinner than he'd been in June, more deliberate in how he carried himself, bearing the weight of consequences without appeal. This was what repair actually looked like. Not a dramatic turn, but small right choices made repeatedly accumulating into something solid. I believe you're trying, I said. That's not nothing. We stood without needing to fill the silence, watching the frost pull back where sunlight reached the lawn. December 29th came in unseasonably warm. Miriam and I drove into town for errands, choosing the route that curved past Bellagrove Country Club. I hadn't planned it, but when the gates appeared, I didn't steer away. Miriam looked out at the precise lawn where Laurel had shredded her in front of the luncheon crowd 8 months before. Her face stayed composed, almost curious. I don't shake anymore when I see that place, she said. I reached across and took her hand. Miriam's hand in mine felt precisely as it had 32 years ago, and I understood that certain things can survive intact if you're willing to defend them. Dignity isn't bestowed by a crowd, sweetheart, I said. It's what remains when the crowd has moved on. She pressed my fingers, still looking toward the club. You taught me that. This whole ordeal, you showed me what it looks like to hold a line without apology. The exit twist arrived not in any confrontation, but in what had quietly been learned. Protection and love were not always the same thing. Sometimes they wore each other's opposite face. Defending the people you loved sometimes meant showing them precisely what love would not permit. I held her hand as we passed those gates, the winter sun dropping behind the building, where she'd been made to feel small and where I'd learned what it truly costs to protect someone. Sometimes I said quietly, keeping the people you love safe means making clear that love has never included the right to make you bow your head. Miriam turned toward me and offered a smile, the real kind, from someone whose dignity had been recovered, not through being proven right, but through never having surrendered it. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. That means something. Looking back on everything this family went through, the betrayal, the legal battles, the cancer diagnosis that reframed it all, I can tell you honestly that none of it unfolded the way I expected. What it cost was steep. What it taught was steeper. I believe God places certain trials in front of us, not to break us, but to force us to decide what we actually stand for. The Lord's timing on that diagnosis felt cruel at first. Later, it felt like a course correction I didn't know I needed. If these father stories have taught me anything worth passing along, it's this. When someone's actions consistently contradict their words, believe the actions. Every time. Mercy and accountability are not opposites. You can forgive a person and still hold them to a standard. A parent's greatest power isn't punishment. It's deciding what behavior the door stays open for. And this one, maybe most of all, if you find yourself wondering whether Dad's revenge was justified, ask instead whether it was measured, because measured is what separates protection from cruelty. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and tell me what part hit hardest. And if you know someone carrying the weight of family betrayal right now, share this with them. Sometimes people need to hear that someone else survived it with their dignity intact. Subscribe to his Hidden Revenge if you haven't already. There are more stories like this one waiting for you. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself and of the people worth protecting.